Marvel's master of multiversal magic. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction, so don't try any techniques you hear here in real life. Your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 176, The School's New Gatekeeper. Tony, you guys can handle this guy. I have something to do, so I'm heading back. Oh, and make a few more sets of those alloy models we made last time. I'll pick them up tomorrow morning. George used magnetism to control Ivan Vanko, who was trapped in the model, and handed him to Tony. He had come out for the Hulk's hair, and helping Tony rescue the man was just a side job. Now that the mastermind had been caught, there was nothing more for him to do. No problem, a few sets, even dozens, are no problem. Tony grabbed Ivan Vanko and assured George. The alloy material was very expensive, but for ordinary people, it was just a drop in the ocean for him. Anything that could be solved with money was no problem for him. However, at that moment, Ivan Vanko, who had been silent all along, suddenly revealed a strange smile. You think you've won? Die together. Suddenly, Ivan Vanko exploded, the powerful blast instantly engulfing George, Tony, and Rhoda. Tony, being closest to Vanko and holding him, suffered the most damage. It turned out that after discovering his robot soldiers were easily dealt with, Ivan Vanko had sensed something was wrong. Having already resigned himself to death, he had swallowed a powerful high-explosive bomb before setting off. When Tony grabbed him, he resolutely activated the high-explosive bomb within his stomach. Armor protection. George waved his hand, casting an armor spell in front of him, but was still pushed back several meters by the powerful blast. Tony and Rhoda were blasted through the air, crashing heavily into the plaza below. This guy, he's ruthless. George deactivated the armor spell, looking at the fragmented Ivan Vanko, speechless. Did he really have to go to such lengths? He should have known that self-destruction would at most injure Tony, not kill him. George simply didn't understand. Where there's life, there's hope, he reasoned. Not self-destructing would at most mean going to jail, and there was always a chance to escape later. Now, he was completely dead. Shaking his head, he fell from mid-air, briefly checking on Tony and Rhoda. Rhoda was alright, because he was a bit further away. He reacted quickly, protecting his chest with his hands. Although he was dazed from the fall, he wasn't seriously injured. Tony, however, was in trouble. Being too close, he hadn't had time to react. The entire chest area of his Iron Man suit had been blown off, leaving a large wound that was bleeding profusely. George, I might need you to call an ambulance. Tony lay on the ground, panting, and joked with George. I didn't expect this guy to have a bomb hidden inside him. Isn't he afraid he won't be able to get out if he wins? No need for an ambulance. With me here, this injury won't kill you. George pointed to Tony's wound. Heal as before. White healing magic covered Tony's wound, and it immediately healed at a visible speed. There are no healing spells in the holy light magic of the fairy tale world. He asked Makarov, who said that the healing magic is not holy light magic, but lost sky magic. But fortunately, healing magic exists in the Harry Potter world. While learning the divine resurrection spell for rapid healing, George also spent a lot of time learning ordinary healing spells. In particular, Amy, as an Auror, was very good at healing spells, which allowed him to make considerable progress in healing spells during the summer vacation. Although his healing spells weren't quite as refined as Amy's, capable of reattaching severed limbs, nor could they be as powerful as Madame Pomfrey's, who could essentially revive most of the body as long as the victim wasn't dead. Healing Tony's injuries shouldn't be a problem. Tony, at that moment, Pepper rushed over from the exhibition hall, throwing herself at Tony and anxiously checking him over. How are you? Are you hurt anywhere? Seeing Pepper and Tony's affectionate display, George and Rhodes exchanged a glance and looked up at the sky in unison. Let's go. With everything over, he didn't want to stay and witness their lovey-dovey antics, so he paraded back to the school. Once back, he released Banner and Betty from the box, handing them over to Professor X to familiarize them with the school, while he took the still unconscious Abomination to the underground training room. Quickly revive. After awakening Abomination with a revival spell, seeing Abomination warily looking around before attacking again, he instantly transformed into a giant and slapped it to the ground. Then, grabbing Abomination's head, he said, "Calm down now, or I won't hesitate to crush your head off." His giant magic had already allowed him to grow to 8 or 9 meters tall, while Abomination only reached his waist. Even in melee combat, he could easily overpower Abomination, not to mention the added strength from his clone's constitution, making him several times stronger than Abomination. Abomination, rendered powerless by George's 2 blows, replied with his skull about to be crushed, Okay, I'll calm down. Now I'll give you 2 choices. 1, I'll beat you to death right here, in a very cruel way. 2, I'll make you a gatekeeper at my school for 5 years, and after 5 years I'll set you free." George released Abomination and said calmly, "I don't want to choose either," Abomination thought to itself, but seeing George's emotionless expression, it didn't dare say it aloud. It could only nod with difficulty. "It seems I have no choice. I hope you keep your word." "I always keep my word, and I hope you don't pretend to agree and then try to escape. To tell you the truth, I have many abilities, including the ability to find anyone in the world I want to find. If you escape, I will still beat you to death when I find you." In a very cruel way, George patted Abomination's shoulder, returning to its normal size. Before leaving the underground simulation room, he said, "Stay here for the next few days. Come out when you can control yourself and return to your normal size, so as not to scare the children at school." With Professor X at school, even if he wasn't there was no fear of Abomination causing trouble. Professor X was now a top-tier level 3 psychic, unable to control people on a large scale as before, but controlling Abomination was not a problem. Moreover, Abomination wasn't stupid. After understanding George's strength, it knew what it could and couldn't do. George understood that Abomination wasn't inherently bad, he was just very competitive. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been reformed later. He believed Professor X would have a way with this kind of person. Perhaps after a few more conversations, Abomination might not even want to leave the school 5 years later. Chapter 177 Part-Time Teacher Iron Man. The next morning, George greeted Professor X and paraded to the front door of Tony's mansion. "Good morning, Mr. George. The master is already waiting for you in the lab." The security camera at the door scanned George. Jarvis's voice came through, and the iron gate slowly opened. George nodded and walked back into Tony's mansion. Since Obadiah led mercenaries into the mansion, killing many of the guards, Tony hadn't hired any more bodyguards. His only driver and bodyguard, Happy, remained at Stark Tower as the security chief, responsible for protecting Pepper Potts. In Tony's view, if the enemy couldn't even handle him, the bodyguards were just a few casualties. Passing through the hall to the basement lab, he saw Tony diligently working on the design of a new suit. It must be said that although Tony was a playboy and sometimes unreliable, he was never careless when it came to work. Even after a passionate night with Hollywood's most beautiful actress, once he had an idea, he would immediately get up and go to the lab. "George, you're here. I made 5 sets of what you wanted last night." Working through the night, seeing George enter the lab, Tony put down the design drawings and pointed to a large box beside him. George went over and collected the various alloy ones from the box into his own. After a moment's thought, he asked Tony, "Since you handed the company over to Pepper, are you quite free these days?" "A lot more free. I think it's great. It gives me more time to research and develop new energy sources and upgrade my suit." Tony had his robotic arm, Ben, pour him a glass of red wine. He finally didn't have to drink that damn chlorophyll juice anymore. Since confirming his relationship with Pepper, he stopped flirting and didn't have to worry about company affairs. He could just focus on research and occasionally show up to deal with terrorists. To be honest, sometimes it felt a little boring. "How about occasionally coming to our school to teach the kids as a part-time teacher? Logan's been saying he wants to drink with you." George had been thinking about it carefully for a while. Thanos, in his quest for the Infinity Stones, will undoubtedly attack Earth with his cosmic army. Therefore, it seems reasonable for him to prepare in advance. Nick Fury's desire to form the Avengers to defend against a potential crisis isn't a bad thing. If Earth is destroyed, he, the teachers, and the students at his school will all suffer. Therefore, he doesn't intend to stop the Avengers formation. However, he can't let Nick Fury, or the government, lead the formation, otherwise, They might be used against this unruly individual before even fighting Thanos. He can gather these superheroes around him, using them to fight Thanos. Indeed, when Thanos attacked Earth with his cosmic army, what role did the government play? What role did Nick Fury play? Nothing. Oh, he paged Captain Marvel, but that was after the event was already over. Now, his school is recruiting teachers. Captain America and the Hulk have already joined, and he and Tony already have a relationship, so he can bring them over as well. In a couple of days, I'll go help Thor again. Most of the original Avengers will be on his ship. Later, when I have time, I'll recruit more students and teachers, train them well, and maybe when Thanos attacks with his cosmic army, I won't even need to show up. The teachers and students alone will be enough to make Thanos cry for his mother. Actually, there's no need to be too deliberate or waste too much time. Sometimes it's just something that happens naturally. Jacket Wolf wants to drink with me? Okay, I won't lose to him this time. But asking me to teach a bunch of kids, is that a bit? Tony received George's invitation, and his face immediately showed a tempting expression, but his pride prevented him from immediately agreeing. Despite his glamorous lifestyle, he didn't actually have many close friends. Rhodes was one, Happy was half a friend, and Ethan, who had shared hardships with him, was another. Rhodes was busy with official duties and they rarely saw each other. Happy was sent to protect Pepper Potts, and Ethan had gone back to help the poor in his hometown with free medical care. As for George and Logan, he had already considered them friends in his heart. However, these two guys wouldn't tell him the school's location, nor did they invite him to visit, clearly showing they were still wary of him, which left him slightly uneasy. Since George offered him a part-time teaching position today, it meant he trusted him completely, and his unease naturally disappeared. "Don't you have confidence?" George directly provoked him. Tony couldn't stand such an insult and immediately shouted, "Who am I? I'm Tony Stark. I graduated from MIT with top honors at 17, I've given lectures at countless prestigious universities, I can't teach those little brats at your school." "Alright, interested in visiting our school now?" George shrugged. Tony nodded. "Let's go, right now." George immediately grabbed Tony, and apparating to the mutant school. "I think next time, I'd better just fly here myself in my suit," Tony muttered, gagging a couple of times. The first experience of apparating, feeling like being squeezed out of a rubber tube, wasn't exactly comfortable. "I'll send you the location in a bit. You can come here yourself next time, but remember to take this." George tossed a glass ball to Tony. Tony caught a ball and looked at it. "What's this?" "A ball containing my energy. I set up a special barrier outside the school. Only those carrying this ball can see the school and enter without being affected by the barrier," George explained, then led him around the school. After walking a few steps, he encountered Banner and Betty. "Good morning, Banner and Betty. Did you sleep well last night?" "Good morning, Principal. This is the first time I've slept so soundly without worrying about transforming," Banner replied with a smile. "This is Banner and Betty, our new teachers. This is Tony. You met yesterday," George introduced them. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Banner. I've read several of your papers in the field of positrons. They're very good." Tony went up and patted Banner on the shoulder, unusually kind to someone he was meeting for the first time. "Thank you," Banner gave an awkward but polite smile. Chapter 178 George jumps to be the seer. After greeting Banner and Betty, he introduced Tony to Wolverine, Professor X, and the students at the school. Wolverine was an old acquaintance, but it was their first time meeting Professor X. However, Professor X was adept at handling Tony's personality, and a few words were enough to make Tony think the professor was a nice person. Just then, Isa landed in the X-Force. It was Captain America, Steve Rogers, returning. "Steve, I thought you wouldn't be back until tonight. Carter can't stay awake for long, and my staying there too long would also affect her rest." Steve sighed with some disappointment. Seeing the now-aged Carter, his feelings were very complex. The person he loved back then, the person he promised to dance with, was now married with children, and her hair was white. People always have to look forward. "Introduce me to new teacher, part-time teacher Tony Stark," George comforted him, introducing Tony to Steve. Tony, looking at the great hero his father always mentioned, the one he'd heard from thousands of times to annoy him to no end, couldn't help but say, "Hello, Captain. Why aren't you wearing that aerobics leotard?" "Hello, Tony. Perhaps you should call me Uncle. After all, my relationship with your father is more like brothers." Captain America was already in a bad mood, and hearing his friend's son's awkward greeting only made him more displeased. Shouldn't they be getting along well? I feel like they don't quite get along, Logan whispered to Professor X from behind. Professor X chuckled, you were the same when you first met Scott, he even saved you back then. Don't worry, they're both good people, they'll become good friends over time. Steve, you're back just in time, everyone's here, I have something I'd like to discuss with everyone. George didn't take Tony and Steve's little squabble to heart, and instead led them to the school's main conference room, also calling Banner and Betty over. I recently awakened a new ability. What new ability? Everyone was curious. They all knew George had many abilities, and they were constantly increasing, but bringing them all together to discuss this meant it couldn't be simple. George's expression became slightly serious. It's the ability to foresee the future. I can inadvertently see glimpses of the future. He was now playing the prophet, revealing some future events beforehand. Firstly, it was to boost team cohesion. External conflicts would prevent internal conflicts from arising. If the Avengers had known from the beginning that Thanos intended to collect the Infinity Stones and wipe out half of all life in the universe, would the Sokovia Accords have happened? Of course, he wouldn't directly reveal Thanos now. Everyone's hearts couldn't handle that. He would proceed step by step. Secondly, he planned to help Thor fight Loki, preventing Loki from bringing a large number of Chitauri soldiers to invade Earth, like in the movies. If such a thing could be avoided in advance, it was best not to happen. After all, this wasn't the main universe. Who knew if it would only be Chitauri soldiers coming? What if there were others? Then it wouldn't be certain they could defeat them. So the best way was to stop it beforehand. However, he also considered that because he had previously revealed Hydra's existence to Nick Fury, SHIELD was currently engaged in a battle with Hydra and might not have the energy to deal with Thor. Given this butterfly effect, it was uncertain whether Thor could even wield Mjolnir. Facing the Destroyer alone was also risky, and he didn't know the strength of Loki in this universe. If it was just the Loki who only knew how to stab people with daggers, that wouldn't be so bad. The real danger was the Loki who might be the greatest sorcerer of the 9 realms. Therefore, he decided to take Iron Man, Captain America, and others with him, hoping to lend a hand and also show them that there are always stronger beings out there. Predictive abilities? Do they really exist? Everyone expressed skepticism about the ability George described. Being able to predict the future sounded unbelievable. Other abilities could be explained scientifically. Even teleportation could be considered quantum teleportation technology, though current technology couldn't reach that level. But predicting the future, how could that be explained? At this moment, Professor X spoke up. Mutants have many kinds of superpowers, and prophetic abilities have appeared before, so there's no need to doubt it. The key is George, what did you see in the prophecy that makes you so concerned? Have any mutants ever had prophetic abilities? Of course not, at least he hadn't seen any. But that's not important. Since George claims it's a prophetic ability, he must have his reasons, and he'll just cover for him. Right, George, what did you see? Everyone reacted at this point and looked at George curiously. George said with a solemn expression, I saw an alien army invading Earth, and then we were fighting to the death against those aliens to protect Earth. George, are you sure you didn't have a dream, but a prophecy? Tony joked, somewhat disbelievingly. Aliens? There's currently no concrete evidence of the existence of alien civilizations in this world, let alone an alien army invading Earth. Only science fiction novels have that kind of plot. Aliens do exist, because we've encountered them. Professor X began to recount the entire incident of the deadly invasion of Earth, attempting to seize Phoenix's power. After listening, everyone remained silent for a long time. Captain America, a figure from World War II, had only recently emerged from his frozen state and was still largely unaware of modern technology, let alone the existence of aliens. He wasn't particularly knowledgeable about the universe or other planets. Tony, Banner, and Betty, on the other hand, as top scientists, believed that humanity wasn't alone in the universe and that other extraterrestrial civilizations existed elsewhere. However, they hadn't realized that aliens had already visited Earth. George then explained, aliens do exist. The government has known this for a long time, which is why they established an organization called SWORD, which operates from spaceships in outer space. I've also discovered some intelligence from SHIELD 15 years ago. It seems an alien fleet came to Earth, but then left for unknown reasons. Nick Fury started drafting the Avengers plan around that time, wanting to find people with special abilities to form a team, which he would lead to resist the aliens. Chapter 179 Thor in the Pet Shop. I know about that Superboy project. Cyclops mentioned it when he first met me and even wanted me to join. Who am I to work for him? I refused, Tony chimed in. He'd also heard Nick Fury mention the Avengers project, but not in such detail. George, have you seen any useful clues? Otherwise, just knowing aliens are going to invade makes it hard to prepare. Steve then raised the crucial point. He already believed George's words, so he was now thinking about how to deploy troops to deal with the impending alien invasion. All I know right now is that the leader is called Loki, and the latest clue I've seen is that he's been spotted near Old Bridge, New Mexico. So, I was thinking if anyone has time, could you come with me to check it out? Maybe we can find some useful clues there. George finally revealed his purpose. No problem. You take me back to get my suit put on, and I'll go with you. Tony nodded in agreement first. He wouldn't refuse George's help, and most importantly, even without George, if he knew this information, he would investigate himself to protect Earth. I think we shouldn't delay. If that's the case, we should leave as soon as possible. Steve immediately nodded in agreement. As a hero who could use his frail body to shield others with a grenade and was willing to die to save a city, how could he possibly refuse? Seeing Tony and Steve agree, he turned to Banner and Betty. Will our help? Banner asked somewhat uncertainly. George immediately nodded. Of course it will help. You and Dr. Betty are both top scientists. Maybe you can find some clues about aliens entering Earth. Okay, then we'll participate too. Before Banner could answer, Betty agreed first. As a scientist, putting aside saving the Earth, how could she miss the opportunity to witness aliens and alien technology? Moreover, with a powerful principal, Iron Man, and Captain America around, she felt that safety was not an issue. Very good, that's settled then. Seeing that everyone had agreed, George began to arrange the itinerary. Professor, stay at the school. You all go back and prepare. I'll take Tony back to get his suit first, then we'll take the fighter jet to New Mexico together. Someone definitely needs to stay at the school, otherwise someone might take the opportunity to steal it. The professor's telepathic abilities can cover the entire school and he can control abominations. He can handle any situation, and his abilities overlap with his own, so it's better for him to stay at the school. As for why he brought Betty, who has no combat ability, it's because Betty can guide Banner to some extent after he transforms. Otherwise, Hulk might not help fight the Destroyer but instead beat him up first. Everyone dispersed to prepare, and George once again used apparition to take Tony back to his mansion. While Tony was putting on his new Iron Man suit, George also took out the Hulk's hair and created a new set of ones made from the Hulk's hair. He roughly tested the power, and the effect was very good. It was even better than the ones he had in the Harry Potter world, and it was comparable to the magic rings in the Apprentice wizarding world. In his past life, he had heard that the Hulk's power wasn't solely due to gamma rays, but also because his true strength originated from a dimensional demon or a hellish monster. Therefore, even if others obtained his blood and became similar to the Hulk, they would never be his match. And the concept of growing stronger with anger wouldn't hold true. Perhaps there was some truth to that, which explained the unexpected effect he achieved using the Hulk's hair as the core of his staff. Returning to the school with Tony in his Iron Man suit, everyone was already prepared. Actually, there wasn't much to prepare. Captain America simply took his shield, not his signature bodysuit. Wolverine's weapon was the adamantium claws within his body. He didn't even need a weapon. As for Banner and Betty, they simply retrieved some testing equipment from the school, intending to see if they could be used later. The group then boarded the X-Force and quickly flew towards Old Bridge, New Mexico. About an hour later, they arrived above Old Bridge. We need a plan, then we need to assign tasks. We can't just go out so obviously, it'll expose us. Steve pulled out a map of Old Bridge, about to present his plan, but before he could finish, Tony had already taken off in his Iron Man suit. I'll scan the area around Old Bridge first, see if there's anything unusual. Don't worry about him, Steve, you continue. George smiled and let Steve continue. Every hero has their own personality, their own strengths and weaknesses. He didn't intend to recruit them all as his underlings. He didn't have the charisma or the energy. Like Tony, you could never make him your underling. These heroes would naturally discover each other's strengths through interaction and compromise, thus easing tensions. His job was to bring them together, give them a goal, and let them solve it themselves. He would fill in the gaps and use the opportunity to achieve his own objectives. So, if Tony wanted to go and gather intelligence on his own, let him go. Besides, his suit was already very conspicuous. He knew it would be exposed as soon as he got down there. Steve wanted to proceed according to plan, step by step, and they cooperated by following his lead. "Buddy, you keep going," Logan said, puffing on his cigar, gesturing for Steve to continue. He didn't like using his brain anyway. If Steve and Tony wanted to, let them. He just needed to focus on the fighting, saving himself the trouble. Steve didn't argue with Tony and continued deploying according to the map of Old Bridge. So, after the X-Fighter stealthily landed not far from Old Bridge, George, Steve, and the others entered from 4 different directions to gather information about Loki. George went east, Steve west, Logan south, and Banner and Betty north. Not long after entering Old Bridge from the east, George spotted Thor in front of a pet shop. "I need a horse," Thor, dressed in Earthling clothes, yelled at the pet shop owner. The pet shop owner looked at Thor like he was an idiot. "Sorry, we don't have horses, only cats, dogs, or birds." "Then find me the biggest one," Thor commanded. The pet shop owner silently pointed to the golden retriever in the cage next to him. "That's the biggest one." Thor was speechless for a moment. "Sir, perhaps I can help you a little." George pushed open the pet shop door and smiled at Thor. Chapter 180, The Hammer That Can't Be Lifted. "I need to retrieve my Mjolnir from 50 miles away. If you can help me, I'll reward you handsomely." Thor walked out of the pet shop, speaking arrogantly to George standing before him. George smiled. "The reward I'm asking for isn't cheap. I can afford any reward." Thor raised his head. As long as he retrieved Mjolnir, he could regain his divine power and return to Asgard. Mortals care most about gold, and he would give this mortal a large piece of gold as a reward. "All right, then come with me." George waved his hand and led Thor towards the X-plane. "My name is George. What's your name?" "Thor Odinson," Thor explained. "As a mortal, you might not believe it, but I am the thunder god of Asgard." All the mortals he had encountered before, including Jane Foster and the others who had helped him, thought he was a madman, but now that he had no divine power, he couldn't prove anything. "I believe you." Before Thor could finish speaking, George interrupted him. "Do you know Loki?" "Loki, he's my brother. He's in Asgard now." Thor was somewhat surprised. It was the first time a mortal had believed him so easily, even knowing about his brother. "Mortal, you have discerning eyes." He was in a very good mood. George didn't explain, only saying, "I have a few friends. Can I give them a ride?" "Of course, as long as you take me 50 miles northwest, to that place with a hammer, I can take them all." Thor waved his hand dismissively. He felt that the mortals he had met in Midgard were all quite nice, except for the few in the hospital. "Steve, Banner, Betty, and Logan, I found a clue. We can go back to the fighter. Tony, you go 50 miles northwest of town, to that place with a hammer and wait for us." George picked up the communicator at his waist and informed the others. 10 minutes later, the fighter jet took off. Thor sat on the plane with some curiosity. "Is this your mortal spaceship? It looks much better than before, but it's still quite outdated." Steve and the other 3 looked at the blonde, bearded Thor and asked George with questioning eyes. George then transmitted his voice telepathically. "His name is Thor, Loki's brother. In the future I see, he's a friend on our side. But he doesn't know us yet. Let's go where he's going first, maybe we can learn more there." The 4 looked at each other and nodded. Although they felt that this Thor seemed a bit slow-witted, since George said so, they would wait and see. They hadn't found any useful clues yet. "I found the hammer. There are quite a few people having a party around it. I've paid them to leave temporarily." At this moment, Tony's voice came through the communicator. Soon, the fighter jet flew to the location of Thor's hammer and slowly landed. George led the group away from the fighter jet and saw Tony, clad in his Iron Man suit, struggling to pull Mjolnir. Even with the suit's power maximized, the hammer remained unmoved. "George, something's wrong with this hammer," Tony exclaimed, pulling down his mask and revealing a puzzled expression. "I scanned it. This hammer contains extremely high levels of energy. Mortals cannot lift Mjolnir. Only Odin, the father god, and his true master, myself, Thor, are worthy to wield it." Thor pushed aside Steve and Wolverine, who were blocking his way, and strode confidently to Mjolnir. Everyone looked at George, who shook his head, signaling them not to move. Thor grabbed the handle of Mjolnir and pulled hard. The hammer didn't budge. In disbelief, He grabbed both hands and pulled again. Still, it didn't move. He planted his feet on the stone and pulled with all his might, but nothing changed. How could this be? Why, Father God, why are you doing this to me? Thor collapsed on his knees, utterly dejected, and howled to the heavens. Tony, seeing this, asked George, where did you find this actor? He's not an actor. He said his name is Thor, the god of thunder from Asgard, and his brother is Loki. I did see him in the future, George explained simply to Tony. Tony clearly didn't believe Thor's identity. Asgard? You must be joking. How can there be a god on this world? At least he doesn't look like one. Thor, can you tell us your story? Maybe we can help you, George said gently, looking at Thor. Thor, still dazed, saw someone willing to listen and murmured his story. A few days ago, during my coronation ceremony, George summarized. Thor was being crowned as the new king in Asgard when frost giants infiltrated the treasury, intending to steal the coffin of eternity, thus interrupting his coronation. Thor was furious and wanted to request Odin to allow him to lead an army to attack Jotunheim and teach the frost giants a lesson. However, Odin refused and reprimanded him. Thor was enraged, believing that Asgard, as the ruler of the 9 realms, had been invaded by its former defeated adversaries, and that choosing to remain silent would damage Asgard's prestige and leave it in constant danger of invasion. Therefore, Thor disobeyed Odin's orders and, without permission, led his closest allies, the warriors 3, the goddess Sif, and his brother Loki, to Jotunheim to confront Laufey, the frost giant king. Laufey, that scoundrel, not only spoke arrogantly, insulting Asgard, but also mocked Thor as a little princess. Thor, unable to tolerate this, immediately grabbed Mjolnir and started fighting. He was eventually surrounded by the frost giants and only saved by Odin's timely arrival. Back home, father and son had a huge argument. Odin felt Thor was immature and unfit to be a king, so he stripped him of his divine power and banished him to Earth to reflect on his actions. Overall, it wasn't much different from the movie world. The only difference might be that SHIELD was busy fighting Hydra and didn't have time to deal with the falling hammer, nor did they send Coulson to investigate. Do you believe it? I certainly don't, Tony shook his head. He only believed what he saw. Thor's story sounded like a tale, hard to believe. He thought the hammer on the ground was stuck because its energy was too strong, creating some kind of special physical phenomenon. Chapter 181 Thor Steve. Captain America Steve and Tony had completely opposite opinions. His tone didn't sound like he was lying, and considering the future vision George predicted, it's not impossible. Perhaps the aliens invading us are soldiers from Asgard. Banner analyzed. Some stories in mythology aren't unfounded. In the eyes of ancient people, our current technology was nothing short of mythology, nothing short of miracles. If Odin, Thor, and Loki are aliens, and Asgard is an alien civilization that visited Earth before human civilization was advanced, leaving behind mythological legends, that's not impossible. So, in the future George saw, Loki leading aliens to invade Earth was likely because he wanted to kill Thor, solidify his throne, and then rule the Earth. Tony was also swayed by Banner's speculation. Although he was self-centered, he wasn't stupid. If Banner's speculation was reasonable, he would change his mind. What are you talking about? Why would Loki want to kill me? Why would he invade Midgard? Thor's expression immediately changed upon hearing Tony and the others' conversation, revealing anger. Tony looked at Thor in disbelief and said, seriously, you big oaf, don't you understand? It's obvious your brother Loki is behind all this. He was the one constantly urging you to go to Jotunheim, and Odin's arrival was definitely his doing. This way, you're banished, and he has a chance to seize the throne. Isn't that a blatant conspiracy? When did he urge me? I went myself. He kept trying to dissuade me, Thor roared, explaining. He certainly didn't believe this mortal's conspiracy theories. If you continue to insult my brother like this, even for George's sake, I'll beat you up. If gods are this stupid, then I don't need to worry about alien invasions. Tony rolled his eyes. He could tell that if this guy wasn't Thor, he was definitely a mentally unstable lunatic. If he really was Thor, he was a muscle-bound brute. My psychic abilities tell me he's not lying, and I did indeed find a powerful energy within him similar to that hammer, only it was sealed, George said earnestly, making up a story. Since he's Thor, we need to find a way to help him return to Asgard and stop Loki from becoming Asgard's king, thus preventing a future war between Asgard and Earth. He didn't bother explaining where everyone had misunderstood. because it was unnecessary. The result was the same anyway. As long as Loki was stopped and imprisoned in Asgard, he wouldn't be able to side with Thanos. Without Loki's help, Thanos couldn't use the Space Stone to send Loki to Earth and cause all the subsequent events, and naturally, there wouldn't be an alien invasion. So this misunderstanding wasn't actually wrong. On the contrary, explaining Thanos and the Chitauri soldiers now would be too complicated. Thank you, but you can't help me. Father God won't forgive me, so I can't return to Asgard. When Thor heard that George and the others were going to help him, although he was still angry about their slander of his brother, his attitude improved considerably. Let's go back to town and discuss it slowly. There's always a way. George patted Thor on the shoulder and then said to the others, let's all try to pull out Mjolnir. If we can, maybe we can help Thor regain his divine power. Okay, let's try. Everyone was very curious about Mjolnir, which Shiv and Tony couldn't pull out with his Iron Man suit. Hearing George's suggestion, they were all eager to try. First up was Wolverine Logan. He stepped forward, gripped the handle with both hands, and pulled with all his might, but the hammer didn't budge. Then Tony tried again, but still couldn't. Seeing that Logan and Tony couldn't do it, Banner and Betty lost hope. They tried briefly and then gave up. Banner didn't want to let Hulk try, and George didn't force him. Finally, it was Captain America, Steve Rogers' turn. Everyone didn't have high hopes for the Captain either. After all, although the Captain's strength surpassed that of normal humans, it couldn't possibly match the mechanical power unleashed by Tony's suit. However, George narrowed his eyes slightly. He knew that the only hope here was Steve. If Odin was truly asleep and didn't interfere, Captain America could definitely wield Thor's hammer and gain Thor's power in a short time. The Avengers Captain America had even secretly practiced a small combo. Huh? It seems quite light. Steve stepped forward and grabbed the handle of Thor's hammer with both hands. He originally wanted to use all his strength, but he was surprised to find that he pulled it out very easily, and almost dropped it because he used too much force. This power, holding Thor's hammer, Steve immediately felt an enormous power fill his body. He subconsciously pointed the hammer to the side, and a bolt of lightning immediately struck the sky. How could this be? Thor saw that this mortal Steve not only picked up his Mjolnir, but also gained Thor's power and easily released a bolt of lightning. His mentality instantly collapsed. What did Father God mean by this? Not letting him hold it, but letting a mortal hold it? Give me back Mjolnir, Thor roared, charging towards Steve. Steve, seeing this, handed him the hammer without hesitation. Mjolnir belonged to Thor. Even though he could wield it and gain immense power, he had no intention of possessing it. Unfortunately, the moment Thor took the hammer, it fell to the ground. He still couldn't lift it, and he was completely frustrated. Well done, Captain. George's eyes lit up. If their captain could lift Mjolnir, even if Thor was clueless, they could resolve the crisis brought by the Destroyer. The Destroyer was forged by Odin from Uru, imbued with Odin's divine power. Even with Loki controlling it, its power greatly reduced, it was still beyond the reach of ordinary weapons. Its magic resistance was especially terrifying. Only a higher-level artifact like Mjolnir could destroy it. A mere mortal, how could he? Loki, currently in Asgard, was equally distraught. After Loki dealt with Odin's slumber, seized control of Asgard, and became its acting king, he had just dismissed the warriors 3 and Sif, the goddess of war, when he used his magic to spy on the exiled Thor. He witnessed Steve Trevor wielding Mjolnir and gaining the power of Thor. Chapter 182 Kidnapping Saul. I'm not angry, I'm not angry. I already have the Spear of Eternity, I'm already the king of Asgard, I don't need to care about a broken hammer. Loki took a few deep breaths, ending his spying spell. He had intended to see Thor make a fool of himself, but unexpectedly, he became the fool himself. You see, Mjolnir, in Asgard, was originally the exclusive artifact of the heir to the throne, always held by his elder brother Thor. He had tried to lift it many times, but never succeeded. Now Thor had finally lost his divine power and couldn't lift it, yet a mortal easily picked it up. Was he, Loki, inferior to a mortal? Never mind, the important things come first. Originally, he wanted to go down and trick his foolish brother again, to make him completely despair and never think of returning to Asgard. But now, seeing several troublesome mortals gathered around Thor, he abandoned that idea. He felt that the priority now was to go to Jotunheim to find Laufey, the Frost Giant King, and proceed with the next part of his plan. As long as he could kill Laufey, who was assassinating Odin, before Odin awoke from his slumber, and then used the Bifrost to completely destroy Jotunheim. Then he would be a great hero of the entire Asgard, recognized by all the citizens of Asgard, and by Odin and the Queen. On Earth, George saw Thor sitting on the ground, hugging his knees, looking completely dejected. He told Steve to pick up Mjolnir, intending to take everyone and Thor to the town first, and wait for the Warriors 3 and the goddess Sif to arrive. Just then, a campervan suddenly drove up and stopped beside them. 3 people got out of the campervan, and the beautiful woman in the lead saw Thor sitting on the ground, still looking dejected, and asked, "Thor, are you alright?" It turned out that after parting ways with Thor, Jane had been thinking about Thor in the laboratory, and was curious about the hammer Thor had mentioned, so she decided to come and see for herself. Professor Eric, like a father, was worried and brought Jane's student Daisy along. "Jane, I'm fine, just a little." Thor stood up, looking like he was about to break. He had originally planned to repay Jane, whom he had developed feelings for, after regaining his divine power, but now it was all over. Professor Eric, Dr. Banner. Dr. Betty, Eric, Banner, and Betty recognized each other. They had been good friends and had done research together. However, after Banner became the Hulk, he had been hunted by General Ross and SHIELD, and they had lost contact. "Ah, you're Iron Man Tony Stark. You're Angel. I know you." At this moment, Daisy, a college student who had come with her advisor Jane Foster for credits, pointed at Tony and George and screamed. Just last night, she had seen a video on Facebook about Iron Man and Angel battling robot soldiers in Queens, and today she was seeing them in person. The impact on a college student was unimaginable. Angel? What Angel? George was stunned for a moment, then realized it must be a nickname given to him by the public. "Hey, you look so much like Captain America, and your shield. Are you Captain America? Didn't Captain America die?" At this moment, Daisy saw Steve behind George and screamed again. "What about me?" Wolverine walked over, and Daisy blinked. "Don't know him, only a world where Wolverine is injured has been achieved." Daisy has definitely read X-Men comics and knows Wolverine, but that's only in the comics. Not in real life. If Wolverine were to show his adamantium claws right now, Daisy would definitely recognize him. "Since we all know each other, let's go back to town and talk slowly." George waved his hand, and the group began to return to Old Bridge Town. In the evening, in the rented temporary house, the group was helping Thor analyze why he couldn't wield Mjolnir. After eliminating several possibilities, they reached the same conclusion. George, representing everyone, addressed Thor. "From all perspectives, your father Odin didn't banish you to Earth as punishment, he was testing you. He believed that as the ruler of Asgard, one must have compassion and not resort to war to solve problems. So, if you grasp this, you might be able to obtain Mjolnir. Then why can this guy wield Mjolnir?" Thor pointed at Steve. George explained, "Because he possesses noble and pure qualities, his heart is filled with justice and kindness." "Then why can't they?" Thor pointed to Tony and the others, who all turned away. George chuckled, "Everyone has their flaws, they're just not as pure, including me." "Actually, I don't agree with that conclusion. I've always considered myself a noble and pure person." Tony shrugged, disagreeing. Daisy chimed in, "Noble people don't talk about themselves like that." "Sorry, I didn't mean anything by it." Realizing she was criticizing Iron Man, Daisy quickly covered her mouth. Everyone laughed at the sight. Thor looked at Mjolnir, whom Steve had placed on the table, and couldn't help but worry. "Actually, these past 2 days, I've realized that my previous ideas were too radical. Not everything should be solved with war, but I still don't quite understand what Father God said." "It's alright, Steve is a teacher at our school. You can come and stay at our school for a while and ask him for advice. We also have a professor named Charles at our school, who might be able to help you understand your father's words." George took the opportunity to lure Thor away. If Thor couldn't awaken as quickly as in the original story, then it wouldn't be bad to bring him to his school for a while after this incident. At least it would be more convenient for him to go to Asgard or get something from Asgard in the future. "Hey, Electro God, I recommend you read a book called War and Peace. Maybe you'll understand after reading it," Tony casually joked, and Thor immediately turned to look at Jane. "Do you have this book here?" "I don't really have it, but I can download an version for you on Daisy's tablet to read first." Jane hesitated for a moment before replying. Daisy immediately objected, "No way, I want to watch Two Broke Girls tonight. The bookstore in town has it, I can buy it tomorrow." Just as George watched everyone laughing and joking, waiting for the destroyer's appearance the next day, an unexpected event occurred in Asgard. Loki, fearing things might change if he delayed, initiated his plan ahead of schedule. Heimdall, Asgard doesn't need you anymore. Before Heimdall could react, Loki used the icy power of the ancient coffin to freeze him, then used Odin's Spear of Eternity to open the Rainbow Bridge and release Laufey, the leader of the Frost Giants. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 183, An Unexpected Summoning. Laufey, welcome to Asgard. Loki drew his spear, Eternity, and, bypassing the frozen Heimdall, led Laufey and several frost giants straight to Odin's slumbering palace. After drawing away the Asgardian guards protecting Odin, Loki watched as Laufey went in to fight the god of war. He gritted his teeth and held back, only striking when he was mounted on Odin, ready to deliver the fatal blow. Then, he suddenly rushed in and struck Laufey. The spear unleashed a powerful burst of energy, sending Laufey flying. Before Laufey could utter a sound, Loki ended the life of his own father with a second thrust. Lauf, how dare you attack Father God? I, Loki, son of Odin, will not allow it. Loki, you saved your father. Frigga, the queen of Asgard, rose and embraced Loki. Loki released her and angrily said, they dared to do such a thing. I swear, mother, I will make them pay. I think we should first find your brother Thor. You two can discuss it together. War against Jotunheim is no small matter, Frigga said hesitantly. Thor has been banished by Father God. How can I disobey Father God's orders? Don't worry, mother, leave everything to me. Loki dragged Laufey's body outside the room and shouted, immediately gather all the people of Asgard in the plaza outside the palace. I have something to announce. Half an hour later, in the Asgardian plaza, Loki, carrying Laufey's body, addressed the 50,000 people and warriors of Asgard below. Last time, the frost giants sneaked into the treasury, attempting to seize the ancient winter coffin, but failed. This time, they dared to assassinate our great Father God. If we don't retaliate, they'll dare to launch a full-scale invasion next time. Under Loki's smooth talking, the citizens and soldiers of Asgard showed angry expressions, clearly swayed. For the honor of Asgard, I, as the acting king, declare war on Jotunheim. For the honor of Asgard, for the honor of Asgard, all the soldiers and citizens of Asgard shouted loudly. Seeing the time was ripe, Loki raised his hand to silence the shouts and continued, war brings casualties, and as king, I don't want to use the lives of our Asgardian warriors to exchange for the lives of those frost giants. Therefore, I have decided to activate the full power of the Bifrost to destroy the entire Jotunheim in one fell swoop, eliminating the threat forever. Eliminate the threat forever. Most of the citizens and warriors of Asgard responded to Loki's decision. After all, no one wanted their husbands, children, or fathers to die in war. A small group of Asgardians felt this was too cruel. Destroying an entire planet wasn't just wiping out Jotunheim, but exterminating all life on it. Something's wrong. We can't let Loki do this. We must go to Midgard and bring Thor back. The warriors 3 and Sif, upon hearing Loki's decision, immediately sensed something was amiss and quietly left the crowd, rushing towards the Rainbow Bridge. Heimdall, how could this be? But when they arrived at the point where the Rainbow Bridge was activated, they discovered that the gatekeeper, Heimdall, was frozen solid. Fortunately, Heimdall finally used his divine power to break through the icy barrier, blasting away the ice covering his body. However, he was now at his limit. It was Loki. Loki let the frost giants in. It's all his conspiracy. Heimdall revealed everything he knew. The warriors 3 and Sif, the goddess of war, were furious. I knew it was that damned liar. Heimdall, send us to Midgard to find Thor. Too late, they're already here. Heimdall stood up and saw Loki leading all the citizens and soldiers of Asgard towards them. He picked up his sword and planted it in the activation switch of the Rainbow Bridge, then used his last bit of strength to activate it. I'll teleport him directly here, along with his new friends, maybe they can help. The Rainbow Bridge activated, its multicolored light traversing the stars and space, directly landing in Old Bridge, New Mexico, in the house Jane Foster rented. George, Tony, Steve, Logan, Banner, Betty, Thor, Jane, Eric, and Daisy, who were discussing their next move inside, were all completely bewildered as they were teleported over by the Rainbow Bridge. Holy crap, what's going on? George stared dumbfounded at the Warriors 3 and Sif, who were charging towards Thor, and at the Rainbow Bridge and the awe-inspiring Asgardian architecture. This was completely different from his plan. Sure enough, the butterfly effect is unpredictable. George realized that he must have triggered the butterfly effect, leading to such a drastic change from the original story. Let's take it one step at a time. After recovering, he quickly led the astonished group to the Warriors 3 and Sif to inquire about the situation in Asgard. After understanding the situation, George couldn't help but twitch his lips. Before, they only had to face the Destroyer and Loki, now they probably had to add the army of Asgard to the mix. But after thinking about it carefully, it shouldn't be that bad. Thor had led the Asgardian soldiers in battle for years and had a very high reputation in Asgard. He could probably persuade some of them to surrender. And they just needed to hold out until Odin woke up. Well, if Odin was on time, he wouldn't wake up until tomorrow morning, at least another 10 hours, he probably couldn't wait that long. Luckily I brought Banner, and Steve can wield Thor's hammer. George could only be thankful that he hadn't come alone this time, otherwise he would have had to trap to a nearby hilltop to hide. Loki, it really is him. Thor, who now fully understood his good brother's true nature, was filled with anger. However, he then looked at George and the others apologetically. I'm sorry, this is Asgard's business, and we shouldn't have involved you. I'll have Heimdall send you back now. This is no longer just Asgard's business. If someone like Loki becomes the ruler of Asgard, Earth will probably face Asgard's army in the future, George said with a righteous expression. Since Asgard once helped Earth resist the invasion of the Frost Giants, today we will also represent Earth to help Asgard set things right. Thank you for your help to Asgard. Asgard will definitely repay you. With the help of the Warriors 3, Heimdall struggled to his feet and planted his sword in the teleportation switch that opened the Bifrost. If you really have no chance of winning, you can retreat and I will activate the Rainbow Bridge to teleport you back to Midgard. Chapter 184 The Encirclement and Slaughter by the Divine Realm Army. While everyone was talking, Loki, Spear of Eternity, led Asgardian soldiers and citizens across the Rainbow Bridge. George immediately addressed the group. Thor, you stall for time, stall for as long as you can. Steve, you devise the best defense. I need 10 minutes to unleash a major attack. With that, he began chanting a spell. From the day he acquired the ancient lightning magic from the old black wizard's one-eyed eye, he had devoted most of his energy to studying it. Even his clones and other worlds had temporarily slowed down their magical research to focus on the ancient lightning magic. Because of his solid magical foundation, and with 2 experienced aurors to consult, he had finally achieved the basic grasp of the spell a few days ago. Now, it was time to put it to use. Our objective is to hold the main control room of the Rainbow Bridge and prevent Loki from activating its energy and destroying Jotunheim. So we'll defend the entrance to this control room. This way, they won't dare use high-powered weapons to bombard it, as that would also damage the control room. Besides, the Rainbow Bridge is limited in width, so they can't send so many people up at once. We only need to deal with 5 or 6 soldiers at a time. Steve, a master of tactical command, quickly grasped the strengths and weaknesses of both sides. The enemy's strength wasn't just in their Asgardian soldiers, but also in their far more terrifying and advanced weapons, such as the laser cannons towering throughout the city. However, as long as they didn't leave the entrance to the Rainbow Bridge's control room, Loki wouldn't dare use those laser cannons and would only be able to send Asgardian soldiers into hand-to-hand combat. Furthermore, the Rainbow Bridge's limited width would actually make it easier to defend. When the time comes, Logan, the 3 warriors, and Sif will hold the front. Tony, you guys cover the rear. Banner, don't rush to release the Hulk. If we really can't hold on, then you can release the Hulk to help. At this moment, everyone approved of Steve's tactical arrangements, even Tony, who usually didn't get along with him, didn't object. Because he realized that this old guy his father often talked about was indeed capable, and the Mjolnir incident proved Steve's character. He always liked to criticize Steve, mainly because his father constantly mentioned him, which had annoyed him and made him resentful. He always thought Steve wasn't as good as his father said, that much of what he did was just an act, a false image created by the government, and that he was essentially a clown. But in the time they'd spent together, he found that apart from being a bit rigid, Steve was indeed impeccable in other aspects. Just as Steve was giving tactical instructions, Loki also led the Asgardians to the front of the Rainbow Bridge control room and spoke with Thor. Heimdall, the Warriors 3, and Sif, how dare you disobey the Father's orders and bring the banished Thor back to Asgard without permission, and even bring along many lowly mortals. In the name of the King of Asgard, I sentence you to treason. He had known something was wrong when he saw the Rainbow Bridge open in Asgard Square and quickly led everyone over. Upon seeing Thor, he knew he was right, so before Thor could speak, he preemptively set the tone. And my dear brother, you shouldn't have returned before Father awoke. This disobeyed his orders. I won't punish you. And I hope you can return to Midgard. Once Father awakens, I will plead for you immediately. Loki, why did you collude with the Frost Giants? Why did you let Laufey assassinate Father? Is it really for the throne? Thor angrily questioned Loki. The Asgardians behind Loki began to murmur amongst themselves after Thor's words. Loki, however, remained unfazed. As the god of deception and lies, his greatest strength lay in his eloquence and acting, qualities Thor was no match for. Brother, Loki said, how can you say such things to me? I have never sought to seize your throne. It's only because Father is currently in slumber, and Mother is by his side, that Asgard cannot be without a king. I reluctantly became this acting king. I have no intention of taking your throne. Once Father awakens, I will plead for you and allow you to return to inherit the throne. But until then, you cannot disobey Father's orders and return without permission because of such a small amount of jealousy. Loki's sincere acting and those words instantly swayed many of Thor's supporters. Thor roared angrily, Loki, don't try to fool me again. Heimdall and Sif told me everything. Oh, it seems I was wrong. Brother, with your character, how could you be jealous over such a small matter? You must have been misled by Heimdall and the others. Loki waved his hand. Men, seize Heimdall and the others. After Loki's distorted account, and given that he truly wielded the Spear of Eternity and was the acting king of Asgard, the Asgardian soldiers, though somewhat hesitant, still stepped forward with their weapons. Lord Thor, please step aside, all of you, stand back. Thor's roar, his millennial-long commanding presence, immediately caused the Asgardian soldiers to involuntarily retreat a few steps. What are you doing? Do you also intend to disobey orders and betray your country? Loki shouted back sharply, aiming the Spear of Eternity directly at Thor. Even if they couldn't openly kill Thor now, they could still severely injure him and knock him unconscious. Once Thor was unconscious, the Asgardian soldiers would have no more scruples. Watch out! Seeing this, Steve quickly raised his shield and stood in front of Thor, deflecting the energy from the Spear of Eternity. As the king of Asgard, I command all soldiers to take them down. With Loki's roar, the Asgardian soldiers dared not hesitate any longer and charged towards the Rainbow Bridge control room with their weapons in hand. Without his divine power, Thor was escorted back to the control room by Steve and the others, and then the battle began. Captain America, wielding Mjolnir and shield, Wolverine, wielding adamantium claws and seemingly unkillable, the Warriors 3 of Asgard, and Sif, the goddess of war, firmly guarded the front of the Rainbow Bridge control room. Tony, through Jarvis's exceptional perception, promptly used various ranged weapons to cover any gaps in their defenses. For a time, not a single Divine Realm soldier was able to break through the defenses and enter the main control room of the Rainbow Bridge. Chapter 185 Thunderstorm Magic shows its power. Quickly, mobilize all the craftsmen to build a temporary floating platform. Loki, who had retreated to the rear to observe the battle, quickly noticed something amiss. The Rainbow Bridge was only so wide, allowing only 6 Asgardian soldiers to attack at a time, while the enemy also had 6 defenders, making it a 6-on-6 battle each time. Crucially, after the 6 Asgardian soldiers were defeated, the enemy wouldn't push them into the abyss below the Rainbow Bridge. Instead, they would simply leave them lying on the ground in front. The Asgardian soldiers behind were even less likely to push their comrades off the Rainbow Bridge. To continue the attack, they had to move the defeated Asgardian soldiers to the rear for treatment. This delay gave the 6 defenders a chance to catch their breath. Defeating 6 soldiers each time allowed them to rest before continuing, making the battles much easier and less tiring. If this continued, the Asgardian soldiers, whose fighting spirit was already low, might be slowly worn down. It's important to remember that while Asgard had a population of 50,000, the actual number of Asgardian soldiers was less than 10,000. He certainly couldn't let this situation continue, so he ordered the craftsmen to build a floating platform. This way, the Asgardian soldiers could swarm in, at least dozens at a time, attacking from different directions simultaneously, to see how the enemy would cope. Soon, Asgardian craftsmen appeared around the Rainbow Bridge with strange golden instruments. As they activated the instruments, beams of golden light formed floating energy platforms that connected with the Rainbow Bridge, creating a colossal platform centered on the Rainbow Bridge's control room. On this massive platform, there was no longer any worry about falling during the battle, nor would everyone be crammed onto the Rainbow Bridge. Not good. Seeing the Asgardian soldiers surging in from all directions, Steve and the others felt a sense of foreboding. Sure enough, because of the appearance of the giant floating platform, the Asgardian soldiers' attack intensity instantly increased more than tenfold, greatly increasing the pressure on everyone, and the defensive line began to show signs of collapse. At this moment, Steve no longer showed mercy to the Asgardian soldiers, and began to summon lightning with Mjolnir from time to time to assist in the attack. But he wasn't Thor, he didn't have the Odinson bloodline. The power of his lightning bolts came entirely from Mjolnir. While he could compensate with skill in close combat, this special ability made him much weaker. Banner, it's your turn. Seeing the warriors Three and Sif, the goddess of war, begin to injure themselves, and Logan riddled with weapons still in his body, Steve knew he couldn't wait any longer and called out to Banner. Banner, who would risk his life to jump from a plane to save others, naturally wasn't lacking in courage. He yelled and ran from the back, charging towards the Asgardian soldiers. Just as an Asgardian soldier instinctively lunged at Banner with his weapon, the Hulk appeared. Hulk, the Hulk roared, swinging his arms and sending a large group of Asgardian soldiers flying. Hulk, help them! Seeing the Hulk appear, Betty immediately shouted. The Hulk turned to look at Betty, then nodded and joined the fray. With the Hulk as a powerful weapon, the situation immediately improved. Loki, seeing this, was so angry he almost gritted his teeth. These damned mortals, if that's how it is, then they can all die. Raising the Spear of Eternity, he began to summon the Destroyer, a guardian of Odin's vault. Soon, a giant magical armor made entirely of Euro metal landed in front of him. Go and finish them off. The Destroyer leaped in front of the Hulk, unleashing a super high temperature beam from its face, sending the Hulk flying. This enraged the Hulk, who roared as he stood up and charged at the Destroyer, engaging in hand-to-hand combat. The Hulk's defense and regeneration were astonishing. The Destroyer was almost indestructible. The two fought fiercely, neither able to gain the upper hand. But without the Hulk's defense, the battle once again turned in favor of the Asgardian soldiers. Because Steve alone simply couldn't withstand the onslaught. Now let's see what you can do. Loki laughed heartily behind the Asgardian soldiers. At this rate, his plan would soon be complete. However, just then, dark clouds suddenly gathered above the Rainbow Bridge control room, with countless lightning bolts flashing within them. What's going on? Loki looked towards Steve, realizing it wasn't Steve using Thor's hammer. Finally finished reading, at that moment, George opened his eyes, twirling his right index finger, and stepped out of the Rainbow Bridge's main control room. Time to show my true skills. He pointed his right hand to the sky and shouted, Ancient Magic, Thunderstorm Descend. The dark clouds above the Rainbow Bridge control room immediately began to unleash a dense barrage of lightning. The Asgardian soldiers struck by the lightning were instantly limp, and some could barely stand without their weapons. George's ancient magic level was naturally inferior to the old one-eyed man, but his current alloy ring's magical enhancement effect was better than any wand in the Harry Potter world. Therefore, the overall magical power was greater than the magic used by the old one-eyed man in the French Magic Street. However, these Asgardian soldiers were indeed physically strong. Even a single strike from the lightning would leave an ordinary person charred and powerless. But that was enough. Because the Asgardian soldiers were too weak to fight, Steve and his group were essentially crushing them one by one. Soon, the Asgardian soldiers within the lightning's range were completely wiped out. Those outside the range were fine, but if they entered, they would be paralyzed by the lightning. So, they dared not advance further. Steve, go help Hulk. Use your Mjolnir to destroy that magical armor. Seeing that the Asgardian soldiers were under control, George immediately telepathically communicated with Steve. Upon hearing this, Steve grabbed Mjolnir and charged at the destroyer. His lightning magic was useless against the destroyer. Defeating it required Mjolnir. Once the destroyer is defeated, the Hulk will rejoin the battle, and with his ancient magic, they won't fear any number of Asgardian soldiers. Ancient magic uses one's own internal magic to communicate with the forces of nature. These lightning bolts consume natural energy, not magic power. His magic power is only needed to maintain the communication. Therefore, as long as his body can withstand it, this thunderstorm can last until Odin wakes up tomorrow. Charge. Let's see how long his magic power can last. Loki was shocked to see that the destroyer, with the combined efforts of the Hulk and Steve, had actually developed cracks, and roared at the remaining Asgardian soldiers. I can't hold on any longer. 2 chapters later, taking a break. Chapter 186 The Wise Thor. There were 10,000 Asgardian soldiers. After such a long battle, although many seemed to have fallen, less than 1,000 had actually been taken down. So, 9,000 Asgardian soldiers remained surrounding them. Loki felt that even the lightning bolts wouldn't be able to attack so many at once. He already had a strategy in mind. The lightning magic was clearly cast by the mortal mage. He would simply stealthily sneak behind the human mage while everyone's attention was drawn to the Asgardian soldier's charge, and strike him. Once the human mage was dealt with, the lightning magic would be broken. Then, they could swarm in, seize the Bifrost control room, and use the Spear of Eternity to activate the Bifrost and destroy Jotunheim, ending everything. So, while instructing the Asgardian soldiers to charge fearlessly despite the lightning, he left a phantom image of himself. His real body, wielding the Spear of Eternity in one hand and drawing a dagger in the other, quietly crept behind George. You lowly mortal, die! Aiming at George's waist, Loki thrust forward fiercely. However, just as his dagger was about to pierce George, he found that an inexplicable force blocked it, causing it to pause. You really are choosing the path to hell when there's a way to heaven, George grinned, his body rapidly growing larger. His right hand continued to maintain the ancient magic, while his left hand grabbed Loki's ankle, lifting him upside down. You lowly mortal, how dare you! Loki aimed the Spear of Eternity at George, but before he could even raise his hand, he was slammed onto the Rainbow Bridge, the Spear of Eternity slipping from his grasp. Before he could even retaliate with magic, he was lifted up and slammed down again. 1, 2, 3 blows, until Loki seemed to be half dead and unconscious. George finally stopped. How could a psychic like him not sense Loki's overwhelming malice at such close range? He had originally planned to capture Loki first, to find a way to subdue him, otherwise, this fight might go on for who knows how long. If Loki were to ruthlessly unleash some of Asgardian weapons and disregard the Bifrost, they would be in serious trouble. However, this universe's Loki, like the Loki in the cinematic universe, was so fond of stabbing people in the back, and had actually offered himself up. How could he refuse such a good opportunity? So, the instant Loki launched his attack, he used magnetism to immobilize the dagger, and then, before Loki could react, transformed into a giant and finished him off in one fell swoop. Many people have a misconception: when someone is always standing in the back row, constantly casting various ranged spells, that person must be weak in melee combat. The idea that assassins counter mages is a common subconscious notion. In fact, this is true in most worlds. Worlds like Fairy Tale, where everyone is a melee mage, are relatively rare. Alright, everyone stop. After dealing with Loki, George stopped his lightning spell, lifted Loki's body, and shouted loudly. Seeing that their acting king Loki had been captured, the Asgardian soldiers also stopped their attack. They hadn't wanted to attack Thor, who had led them to victory over the millennia, so this was perfect. Handel, go to Asgard and fetch my mother. Thor emerged from the control room and, following George's instructions, gave the order to an officer among the Asgardian soldiers. With Odin asleep, Loki captured, and Thor still in exile, the highest-ranking person in Asgard was now Queen Frigga, who absolutely trusted Thor. Therefore, after dealing with Loki, George immediately telepathically instructed Thor to summon Frigga to oversee the situation. Yes, sir, the officer saluted and rushed towards the golden Asgard. Not long after, Queen Frigga arrived in Asgard's unique ship-shaped flying vehicle. Everyone, retreat. We'll wait for Odin to wake up before making any decisions. The queen disembarked, immediately dismissing all soldiers and their subjects, then rushed forward and embraced Thor. Thor, what happened? She had stayed by Odin's side, worried about him, and was unaware of what was happening outside Asgard. Mother, Loki. Thor immediately told Frigga everything he knew. Frigga looked at the unconscious Loki and couldn't help but sigh. Actually, I've always had a feeling something was wrong. Loki is too stubborn. As the Queen of Asgard and Loki's magical mentor, she might not be good at fighting, but she wasn't completely powerless. She had sensed Loki's schemes, but she hadn't expected him to go to this extent. Thor, I hope you don't hold a grudge against him. The reason he's like this is because of his background. He's not your father Odin's child, he's the child of Loki, the Frost Giant King. What? Thor was immediately shocked by this bombshell from his mother. Mother, you and Loki, what are you thinking, you brat? Frigga raised her hand and smacked Thor on the forehead. Loki is the son of the Frost Giant King. Because he was much smaller than a normal frost giant at birth, he was cruelly abandoned. Your father had just defeated Loki when he found Loki and took him into raise. He hoped that you would become the king of Asgard, and that Loki would return to Jotunheim to become the king of the frost giants, so that our two races would never have to fight again. No wonder I always thought we didn't look alike, and Loki never grew a beard, always so clean-shaven. So he's a frost giant. Thor's face showed a look of sudden realization, then he grinned and said, don't worry, mother, I won't hold a grudge against Loki. Although he's not my biological brother, I will always treat him like one. Of course, he can't be as mischievous as before, that's good. But your father is right. Perhaps you really need to stay in Midgard a little longer. Maybe it will help you gain more wisdom. Frigga was pleased with Thor's attitude, but slightly worried about the intelligence he showed. Sure enough, Thor, who hangs out with the Guardians of the Galaxy, is quite similar in some ways. George, who had overheard Thor and Frigga's conversation, couldn't help but think to himself. Just like when he first saw Adam Warlock in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, he immediately felt Adam should join the Guardians of the Galaxy. That kind of intelligent air was quite similar to Thor's current demeanor. Distinguished guests from Midgard, thank you for your help to Thor. Please come with us to Asgard to rest. After learning about the situation from Thor, Frigga extended an invitation to George and the others who had helped her son. Chapter 187 The Heart Nerves of the Frost Giant King. It does look impressive, but all in gold, it's a bit too tacky. Following Thor and Frigga, the group headed towards Asgard, marveling at the various divine buildings that combine technology and mythological elements. Even Tony could only mutter a few non-flawed remarks. Passing Asgard Plaza, George saw the enormous remains of Loki, the Frost Giant King, who had been killed by Loki's ambush. Frost giants can vary in size, normally standing at 34 meters tall, but can also shrink to a size similar to a human through their abilities. Loki was abandoned because he was born only human-sized. Loki shrunk his size when entering Asgard to assassinate Odin, and after being killed by Loki, he slowly returned to his normal 30 or 40 meter size after being left in Asgard Plaza. Go! As he passed Loki's body, George immediately used magnetic force to control a blade that flew swiftly, piercing Loki's heart and secretly removing some of his cardiac nerves. Don't be fooled by Loki, the Frost Giant King, being killed by Loki's sneak attack. That was mainly because he lost the ancient coffin of winter, the source of his power. At his peak, Loki blinded Odin in one eye, his strength undeniable. If Loki's heart nerves were used as the core of a staff, it wouldn't be much weaker than a hair of Odin's. Upon entering Asgard, they were led to a luxurious room to rest, where a sumptuous meal was prepared. George, you all rest first. My mother and I will deal with Loki's matter. After leading everyone to the room, Thor and Frigga went to handle the commotion caused by Loki, while the others began to chat. Banner, restored by George's arm curse, remarked with a sigh, it seems our guess was right. Asgard is indeed an alien civilization far surpassing Earth's technology. It seems there are many unknown cosmic civilizations in the universe, but I don't think this is a good thing, Tony said, eating a special fruit from Asgard. Judging from the internal strife in Asgard and those highly aggressive ice blocks, while alien civilizations are technologically advanced, their thinking isn't much more advanced than ours. This means that if they wanted to, they could invade Earth at any time, and Earth, with its current strength, simply couldn't resist. Perhaps we should make some preparations in advance. Iron Man, what are your thoughts? Wolverine asked, cutting fruit with his claws. This fruit is really good. I'll have Thor send me some when I get back. Tony ate another bunch of fruit. I think maybe when I get back I can learn from Vanko and create more robotic soldiers. Then, absolutely not, George interrupted Tony before he could finish. Tony, you need to understand, robots are programmed, and alien civilizations often possess technology far superior to ours. If they crack your program, the robots you create will immediately fall under their control and become enemies of Earth. Or, if a criminal cracks your program, we'll be in serious trouble even without an alien invasion. He didn't want Tony to consider creating robots, lest he create another Ultron, some stupid program that destroys the world and re-evolves humanity. It's best to avoid such a crisis beforehand. Whenever someone tries to win a war before it even begins, innocent people sacrifice themselves. History has always been like that. Captain America also spoke up. He didn't agree with Tony making contingency plans for a war that hadn't even started yet. Okay, don't be nervous, I was just saying, Tony shrugged, then looked at the spaceships flying around on the balcony across the room. George frowned at the sight. Tony is a very self-centered person. Once he's made up his mind about something, he won't change it unless he realizes he's wrong. He generally won't listen to what others say. So once the seed of creating robots is planted, it will inevitably sprout sooner or later. It's not a big problem. After thinking for a moment, George felt that it wasn't as serious as he imagined. Ultron mainly appeared because of Tony's research on the Mind Scepter. Without the Mind Scepter, Tony couldn't develop artificial intelligence neural networks. Besides, Loki is currently imprisoned in Asgard, awaiting Odin's awakening and judgment. The Chitauri invasion of Earth will be over, and Tony won't suffer psychological trauma from it, thus avoiding such a strong sense of crisis. Thinking about it further, even if Tony does create those robots, it will be a long time from now. By then, his power will probably have increased several levels, making it much easier to deal with. About an hour later, Thor returned to the room. Father Odin has awakened. He says he wants to see you and personally thank you for your help to Asgard. Awakened at this time, George was stunned. He remembered that in the movies, he wouldn't wake up until tomorrow. Could this old guy have been awake all along, just pretending to be asleep? George couldn't help but wonder. In the movie, as soon as the Rainbow Bridge was smashed, Odin rushed over from his slumbering place in Asgard and stopped Thor and Loki. It's not like things just happened to be that convenient. If Loki hadn't let go, Thor and Loki would have been fine. At most, the Rainbow Bridge would have been damaged, but it could be repaired later. It's not like it couldn't be fixed. They would have gained a grown-up eldest son and a younger son who had realized his mistakes. Odin probably didn't expect Loki's thinking to be so extreme, refusing to admit his errors even at the end. No wonder he's the Allfather who unified the 9 realms. What a cunning old fox, George sighed inwardly, following Thor to the council hall of Asgard. Thinking about it carefully, was Odin a kind soul? Of course not. If he were, he wouldn't have been able to lead Hela to unify the 9 realms, conquer countless kingdoms, and forge the golden Asgard we see today with countless amounts of gold. After sealing Hela, they covered up the fact that they had waged war, adding a layer of deceptive murals to the ceiling of Asgard. Even the Infinity Gauntlet in Odin's vault, though fake, suggests that Odin must have once tried to collect the Infinity Stones, only to abandon the effort for unknown reasons. The current peace is likely due to his impending death. He wants a stable ruler and doesn't want Thor to be as fond of war as he was in his youth. However, he doesn't see a major problem. Regardless of Odin's character, they helped Thor and saved Asgard. These are undeniable facts. Chapter 188 Odin, the Wishing Lamp. In the magnificent Asgardian palace, Odin, wielding the Spear of Eternity, sat high on his throne, with Frigga, the Queen of Asgard, standing beside him. Below him lay Loki, bound and kneeling, along with 2 squads of Asgardian guards. Thor led George and the others into the palace and addressed Odin, saying, "Father, George and the others have arrived." Odin nodded, but instead of speaking to George and the others, he sighed and looked down at Loki, asking, "Loki, is there anything else you wish to say?" "Father, I could have annihilated Jotunheim completely. I did all this for you, for the sake of Asgard. Why can you only see Thor, and never me?" Loki's expression was one of profound desolation. "Loki, I hope you can reflect on your mistakes in the dungeon and understand what I just told you." Odin shook his head and announced to the Asgardian guards, "Take him to the dungeon and imprison him for 10 years. 10 years. Now we don't have to worry about Loki causing trouble." George, who was nearby, nodded secretly after hearing the verdict on Loki. Odin still had some affection for Loki, otherwise, for a crime akin to treason, beheading would have been perfectly reasonable. 10 years was indeed a very short time for Asgardians with a lifespan of 5,000 years. "Loki, you better reflect on your actions. If you do this again after you get out, I'll kick your ass raw." Upon hearing the verdict on Loki, Thor smacked him on the back of the head. Loki, however, quickly composed himself and retorted sarcastically, "Dear brother, have you picked up your hammer yet? Don't worry, I'll definitely be able to pick it up before you get out." As the Asgardian guards took Loki away, Thor seized the opportunity to kick him in the backside again. At this moment, Odin also looked at Thor. "Thor, are you still unable to lift Mjolnir?" "Father, I understand your words. I won't launch another war against Jotunheim. I think you can lift the spell on Mjolnir and end my exile." Thor glanced at Mjolnir, which Steve was helping him carry, and suggested to Odin. Odin shook his head again. "You haven't picked up Mjolnir, which means you haven't fully understood my words, so you can't stay in Asgard yet. You can only return when you can pick up Mjolnir." "Ha ha ha, Thor, maybe I'll be out of the dungeon before you're back." Loki, who had already been brought to the entrance of the hall, had obviously heard Odin's words. "Don't worry, I'll definitely be back before you." Thor wasn't too angry, because he felt that being with Jane in Midgard seemed quite nice. He wasn't so eager to return to Asgard now. "Alright, that's it for you." Odin didn't continue the discussion with Thor, but looked at George and the others. "Now, let's thank our friends from Midgard. Because of your help, Loki's plan didn't succeed. So, I can grant each of you one wish as reasonably as possible." "Really? Can I have a chest of gold?" Daisy immediately asked with sparkling eyes. Jane, her mentor beside her, quickly tugged at her arm. "We haven't been of any help. How can you make such an unreasonable request?" In Jane's opinion, just being able to visit Asgard was already quite an achievement. They hadn't been of any real assistance, and asking for a chest of gold was simply too much. "I was just saying," Daisy stuck out her tongue. Odin smiled gently. "It's alright, gold is as plentiful as stones in Asgard. I'll have someone prepare a chest for you when you leave." Daisy's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected Odin to actually give it to her. "And you?" Odin then looked at Jane, who thought for a moment and said, "If possible, I'd like some knowledge about astrophysics." "I share the same wish as Jane." Professor Eric beside her raised his hand. They weren't greedy for wealth, but as scientists, they simply couldn't resist the temptation of knowledge related to their research. "If it doesn't work, then forget it, it's a small matter. I'll have someone compile some relevant information for you before I leave." Odin looked at the next banner, who hesitated for a moment before replying, "I want to get rid of the Hulk within me and become a normal person again." "My wish is also that you can help Banner become a normal person again." Betty stepped forward and grabbed Banner's arm. Banner always needed to control his emotions like this. The two of them didn't even dare to be intimate at night, fearing that they would turn into the Hulk halfway through, which would be terrible. Odin stared at Banner for a while, and finally replied, "I can't completely remove the Hulk from your body either, because he is a manifestation of your other side, a part of your soul. Removing him would also harm your soul. However, if I can help you merge with him, then you can freely control your transformation. If that's the case, then that's fine too." Banner thought for a moment, and seeing Betty nod, he nodded as well. If he could freely control his transformation, and his transformed body would also be under his control, then he wouldn't hurt anyone anymore, and that would be enough. Odin beckoned to Banner, who was immediately pulled to his side. Odin then placed his hand on Banner's forehead, chanting an ancient incantation, his body shimmering with golden light. In less than a minute, he released Banner, returning him to his original position. "All done." Banner slowly opened his eyes, murmuring, "I feel a little different." It's an indescribable feeling. The Hulk's consciousness merged with his own, making him feel better than ever before, as if a missing part had suddenly become whole. With a thought, his body immediately expanded, rapidly transforming into the Hulk's appearance, but his expression remained unchanged, and there was no anger on his face. "Is this me after transforming? This feeling is amazing." Banner casually leaped 7 or 8 meters high, instantly becoming excited. But he quickly realized this wasn't the time for experiments, and swiftly reverted to Banner's appearance. Wrapped in his stretched-out clothes, he and Betty bowed to Odin in gratitude, saying, "Thank you, Your Majesty." Odin, restored to its original state, George waved his hand, pointing at Banner and using a restoration spell to fix his stretched-out clothes, inwardly marveling, Odin's power is truly monstrous. Just think of how many terrifying opponents Odin defeated to unify the 9 realms. Think of Hela, who, even without absorbing power in Asgard, could crush Thor's hammer with her bare hands, yet was sealed away by Odin. This shows just how terrifying Odin's true power is. Chapter 189 The Enchanting Succubus Lorelei. "I'd like some knowledge about Asgard's technology. Is that possible?" When Odin looked at Tony, Tony voiced his desire. On his journey, he had indeed witnessed a considerable amount of Asgard technology beyond his current understanding. He felt that acquiring knowledge of Asgard's technology would significantly enhance the power of his Iron Man suit. To be honest, when he first saw Thor, he didn't place much importance on Asgard. However, after arriving in Asgard, experiencing the previous battles, and visiting the palace, his opinion had completely changed. Thor was the only one lacking common sense. Asgard's technology was far ahead of Earth's. For example, the Bifrost, responsible for teleportation, was terrifying. It allowed for teleportation and reunification from anywhere in the universe, its mobility unparalleled. Moreover, as long as it wasn't shut down, its energy could even obliterate a planet in just a few minutes, something Earth's technology could never achieve. Asgard's technology surpasses Midgard's by thousands of years, but our technology is magical, quite different from Earth's, Odin explained simply. If you wish, I'll have someone compile some technology suitable for Earth's development for you. Skipping Tony, he looked at Steve, who held Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, a look of admiration on his face. As a mortal, to be able to wield Mjolnir, your quality surprises me. What do you desire? I don't desire anything, Steve shook his head. Everything he had vanished with the years. He was still alive only because of his strong will. If he had to say what he wished for, it would be to return to before he was frozen in ice and attend that missed appointment. In that case, leave your shield behind. I'll have the Dwarf King add some Euro metal to it and imbue it with magic, so you can summon it back to your hand at any time. Odin made the decision for Steve, then looked at Wolverine Logan. Logan chuckled, I heard from Thor that the wines in Asgard are better than those on Earth, especially the barrels his father kept in the lowest level of the cellar, the best wines in the entire universe. I wonder if we could have a barrel. Having lived for nearly 200 years, his wish was for all his deceased relatives and friends to be resurrected, but that was impossible. Odin glanced at Thor, who looked up at the ceiling, pretending not to see, but secretly gave Logan a thumbs up. Both he and Logan were drinkers, and true men at that. In the room Jane Foster rented, he had mentioned his father's barrels of wine, and Logan had remembered, good for him. When they went to George's school, he could also sample his father's wine, which had been stored for so many years, and see just how delicious it was. Alright, I've treasured those barrels for over 2,000 years. One barrel is fine. Finally, he looked at George, the Midgard wizard whom he had sensed was unusual the moment George entered Asgard. As the ruler of the Divine Realm and the father of awakens, he had long ago foreseen the end of the Divine Realm, Ragnarok, an unchangeable destiny for the Divine Realm, one that even he was powerless to alter. However, the moment he saw George, that unchangeable destiny seemed to waver, becoming less firm. Although he didn't know why, he was certain it was related to George. Wizard from Midgard, what do you desire, Your Majesty Odin? If possible, I wish for a branch of the World Tree. If not, some Euro metal will suffice. George looked at Odin, seated on the throne, and stated his goal directly. Odin hesitated for a rare moment before nodding. Very well, I will personally retrieve a branch of the World Tree for you. Hearing Odin's agreement, George's face immediately showed surprise. He had held no hope whatsoever for a branch of the World Tree. In Asgard, only the handle of Thor's hammer and the shaft of the Spear of Eternity are crafted from materials from the World Tree, demonstrating that World Tree branches are among the rarest and most precious materials in Asgard. Therefore, he offered a World Tree branch to Odin to refuse, then asked for more Euro metal, which Odin would find difficult to refuse. Euro metal is rare in Asgard, but still produced in considerable quantities, so asking for more wouldn't be a big loss for Odin. However, he never expected Odin to actually agree to give him a World Tree branch. The World Tree connects the 9 realms and is the source of Asgardian magic. Asgardian sorcerers need to borrow the World Tree's power to cast spells, just as Kamar-Taj arcane sorcerers need to borrow the power of the Vishanti. In the Marvel Universe, all magic is borrowed, and its use comes at a price. Those like the Ancient One, who borrowed and didn't repay, even beating up the Dimensional Lords who came to collect, are rare. If he could use a branch from the World Tree for the staff and the Frost Giant's heart and nerves for the core, he believed the wand he made would be no less powerful than the one from the fairy tale world. With a 20-fold increase in magical power, his ancient thunderstorm spell could engulf an entire city. Hearing Odin's affirmative reply, not only George was surprised, but so was Frigga, the Queen of Gods, who, besides surprise, also felt a hint of worry. Frigga knew that given Odin's current physical condition, obtaining a branch from the World Tree wouldn't be without its price. It might hasten the end of Odin's life. She was about to speak to dissuade him, but Odin shook his head, interrupting her. Considering there must be a reason for Odin's actions, she remained silent. After everything was settled, George and the others were sent back to their previous room to wait. Daisy and the others' items were quickly delivered, but George's request for the World Tree branch took a full 2 hours to arrive. Finally, regarding Steve's shield, the Asgardian guards said they would send it to Steve via the Rainbow Bridge once it was forged. Everything was over, and the group returned to the main control room of the Rainbow Bridge. Heimdall, who had been healed by the Asgardian healing stones, teleported them back to their house in Old Bridge. Meanwhile, in the Asgardian dungeon, Loki lay on his bed, listlessly tossing his dagger. Suddenly, a seductive voice came from the next cell. "Oh my, isn't this Prince Loki of Asgard? What's he doing here?" Loki sat up and looked next door. A woman with distinctive red lips and a full head of red hair was leaning against an energy shield, grinning at him. "So it's you, the Banshee Lorelei." This was a Banshee who could make men obey her every word with her voice. 600 years ago, she used her powers to build a vast army, wreaking havoc in the 9 realms, before being defeated by the Asgardian army and imprisoned in the dungeon. Lorelei licked her lips. "Little Loki, how about we team up for a prison break? Banshee, I suddenly think you have a lot of potential." Loki's eyes lit up, and he sat bolt upright in bed. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 190 New Clone, Misaka number 9981. Thor, we might stay here a while longer to study the astrophysics your father gave us, and then return to New York in a month. Here's my address in New York, you can come find me if you're free. Jane Foster handed Thor a note in front of the X-Force. Thor immediately nodded happily. "Jane, I'll definitely come find you." "Alright, hurry up and get on the plane, everyone's waiting for you." Eric, seeing the lovey-dovey expressions on Jane and Thor's faces, said to Thor with a hint of exasperation. Thor took Jane's hand, bent down and kissed it, then turned and boarded the X-Force. Seeing that Thor was finally on board, George turned to Isaac and said, "Alright, we can take off and head back to school." Thor couldn't lift Mjolnir and would remain exiled to Earth. Without his powers, he was just a strong, ordinary person, and it wouldn't be appropriate for him to stay with Jane indefinitely. Although the two had feelings for each other, they hadn't officially become a couple. Furthermore, only Steve could currently lift Mjolnir. Once Steve left, Mjolnir would be immobile. So Thor decided to heed George's advice and go to the school to study the concept of peace, hoping to understand Odin's teachings as soon as possible so he could once again wield Mjolnir and regain his divine power. Wolverine chatted with Steve, holding the wine he brought from Asgard. Betty and Banner sat together, looking like they would have already taken a passionate sip if there weren't other people on the X-Force. They had been separated for 5 years, and since their reunion, they hadn't dared to be too intimate for fear of transforming into the Hulk, leaving them feeling incredibly pent up. Iron Man, eager to return to Asgard's technology, flew back to Earth on his own without waiting for them. The X-Force flew very fast, and it didn't take long for it to return to the school. After George temporarily lifted the magical barrier surrounding the school, it landed at the airfield and slowly sank to the ground. "Professor, still awake so late?" George saw Professor X standing there as soon as he got off the X-Force. Professor X chuckled. "I was asleep, but I sensed your return and got up again." Actually, he hadn't slept at all. George and the others had been gone for so long, they must have made a discovery and encountered problems. He was also worried about their safety. Perfect timing. "Let me introduce you to a new friend, Thor Odinson from Asgard, the god of thunder in mythology." George pointed to Thor, who had just stepped off the plane and was trying to persuade Logan to share his wine. Professor X looked surprised. "George, you're not kidding me, are you? The god of thunder from mythology?" This was clearly beyond his comprehension. He had seen aliens, but never gods. "Let's talk as we go." George recounted everything about the operation to Professor X. "So, he'll be in your care from now on, no problem." "I never imagined that a god from mythology was also an alien," Professor X agreed with a touch of amazement. After handing Thor over to Professor X, George returned to the simulation room and began carefully crafting his new wand. Having not slept all night, he finally combined the World Tree branch with the heart of the Frost Giant King to create a brand new wand. Swinging the new wand a couple of times, he couldn't help but sigh. This kind of wand feels so much better to hold. The yellow magic ring was indeed more convenient to wear. But it lacked the atmosphere of wielding a wand. It always felt like something was missing. It's like walking down the street and suddenly seeing a piece of wood that looks a lot like a wand. You'd instinctively pick it up and wave it a couple of times. Even if it wasn't a real wand, you'd still find it quite interesting. But if you found an iron ring on the street, it was just an iron ring. You wouldn't even have the desire to pick it up, let alone pretend to cast magic while wearing it. Now that he had a costume-changing space, it was actually quite convenient to store the wand there and instantly take it out when needed. Tested the effect, he waved his hand, fluorescent flash, a light even brighter than the advanced illumination spell shone from the top of the wand. Goodness, this amplification effect is about 25 times. Looking at the light emitted by the wand, he felt that if he used it to be as bright as day, the light would probably be so dazzling that it could blind an ordinary person for a while. Great, time to sleep. After putting the new wand into his dressing space, George returned to his room, took a shower, and planned to get some rest. Overall, he was quite satisfied with this operation. However, just as he was about to fall asleep, that familiar, sharp pain suddenly struck. He knew that he was about to split open again. Sure enough, a few seconds later, a new clone and new memories flooded into his mind. Academy City, Espers, Misaka Mikado, Mass Production Esper Project, Absolute Esper Evolution Experiment, Misaka 9981. This was a new world, a world with superpowers, where Espers were divided into 6 levels, from level 0 to level 5. Academy City was the gathering place for almost all Espers in this world, and was also known as the City of Schools. This city encompasses dozens of universities, hundreds of elementary, middle, and high schools, and over 1,000 research institutions of varying sizes, with a population of nearly 2.3 million, 80% of whom are students. Most of these students live in school dormitories and develop their superpowers through drugs, hypnosis, electrical stimulation, and learning. However, 60% of them acquire only level 0 superpowers, meaning they are practically unable to use them. Academy City possesses the world's most advanced technology, 2 to 3 decades ahead of the outside world, making it the leader in the scientific world. It is independent of all government agencies and enjoys complete autonomy. His current clone, named Misaka 9981, originates from the mass production of Level 5 Espers Project and the Absolute Level 5 Evolution Experiment. The mass production of Level 5 Espers Project was a cloning project undertaken by a research institution in Academy City, which tricked Misaka Mikado, one of Academy City's most powerful Level 5 Espers, into giving birth to her. The experiment used drugs such as Z02, Riz-13, and Hel-03. After 14 days, a body identical to Misaka Mikado could be obtained, while basic brain information such as speech, movement, and ethics was forcibly inputted through a learning device. Each Misaka Mikado clone cost 180,000 yen, which is approximately 8,900 yuan. They planned to mass-produce Level 5 Espers, but the experiment failed. Tests showed that the mass-produced Misaka Mikados only had the potential to reach the level of a Level 2 Esper. Even if 20,000 Misaka Mikado clones were produced, they wouldn't be able to defeat a single Level 5 Misaka Mikado. Therefore, the mass production plan for Espers was changed to an Absolute Esper Evolution Experiment. Chapter 191 Superpower Enhancement. Compared to the mass production of Espers, the Absolute Esper Evolution Experiment was far more cruel and perverse. An Absolute Esper is someone who has surpassed humanity, reaching the level of a god, a Level 6 Esper. According to calculations by Academy City's supercomputer, the tree diagram designer, if accelerator, the top-ranked Level 5 Esper in Academy City, could kill Level 5 Esper Misaka Mikado 128 times in 128 different battlefields. He could evolve from a Level 5 Esper to a Level 6 Esper. However, the Academy didn't have 120 Level 5 Misaka Mikados, so they used 20,000 Misaka Mikado clones instead. These 20,000 clones would fight Accelerator 20,000 times. Once all 20,000 clones were killed, Accelerator would evolve into Level 6 Esper. His current clone is Misaka Mikado clone number 9981, who was killed by Accelerator during the final indoor experimental battle. Although I said last time I didn't want to become an animal again, and wanted a human body, what I want is a man, not a woman. George slowly opened his eyes, looked at himself in his short-skirted school uniform, and couldn't help but sigh. That's right, Misaka Mikado isn't a man, but a woman, or more precisely, not even a woman, just a 14-year-old flat-chested middle school student. Therefore, her clones are all girls of the same age. Look at his clones. The first is an 11-year-old boy, the second is a magical cat, the third is a giant panda, and the fourth is a 14-year-old girl. None of them are normal. Couldn't they just give him a mature man's body? However, this ability is quite good. It greatly enhances my magnetic control. Misaka Mikado, ranked third among the only 7 level 5 espers in the academy, is the strongest Electromaster in Academy City, codenamed Railgun, a second-year student at the prestigious girls' school Tokiwade Middle School. She is known as Tokiwade's ace and the strongest and invincible Electromaster princess, so Misaka Mikado's superpower is electromagnetic control, which is essentially the same ability as the magnetic control she inherited from Magneto. The difference is that Misaka Mikado primarily develops magnetism for power generation, allowing her to manipulate billions of volts of high-voltage current at will, while Magneto mainly uses magnetism to control metal for attacks. Magneto, as one of the 4 fundamental forces, could potentially destroy the universe if developed properly. However, the key is that simply possessing magnetism doesn't guarantee perfect control. Magneto can lift ships, trains, and stadiums, and even reverse the Earth's magnetic field after being developed by Apocalypse, while George can only control metal weighing 1,000 pounds. As for things like magnetic power generation, electromagnetic waves, and microcontrol, he wants to, but he can't do it. Even after spending some time studying the relevant scientific theories, he still can't achieve it. It's like the same sword, in the hands of an ordinary person, it's just wild swinging, but in the hands of a swordsman from a different school, it can be transformed into various exquisite techniques. His application of magnetism is at an ordinary level. No one taught him, he learned it all through trial and error. The most common use is controlling blades or needles for sneak attacks. While Misaka 9981 was merely a clone with only level 2 electromagnetic abilities, after merging with his own magnetic power, his magnetic level jumped directly to the level of a level 4 esper in this world. George also learned how to use Misaka Mikado's abilities, such as releasing electric current, electromagnetic force, and radio waves, from the knowledge implanted in Misaka 9981's mind. Therefore, all his clones and his main body can now control not only metal, but also release high-voltage electricity and flick coins with their magnetic power. Huh? You emotionless puppet, you're still not completely dead after that attack, a cold and somewhat puzzled voice interrupted George's thoughts. Looking up, he saw a somewhat thin, white-haired boy, his eyes filled with murderous intent and madness. This boy was none other than Accelerator, the strongest level 5 esper in Academy City. Since you're not completely dead, I'll send you on your way one last time. Accelerator touched a broken stone pillar, which immediately flew up and crashed towards George. I forgot about you, you troublesome fellow. Seeing the stone pillar hurtling towards him, George didn't use magic to defend himself. Instead, he tried to convert magnetism into high-voltage current based on Misaka 9981's memories, and pointed his hand at the incoming pillar. The pillar bounced back under the influence of the high-voltage current. However, just as the pillar was about to knock Accelerator down, it seemed to be stopped by an invisible defense, causing no damage whatsoever. Accelerator was clearly surprised by the intensity of the electricity George unleashed. Wait, you're not a puppet. Puppets don't have this much electricity. Are you the real person? No, you weren't like this just now, and the real person's electricity should be much stronger than yours. Interesting, very interesting. He stomped his foot forcefully, and the concrete floor exploded, sending countless stones hurtling towards George at bullet speed. George waved his hand, and the iron door beside him instantly flew in front of him, blocking all the stones. He then dodged and plunged into the stairs behind the iron door. Accelerator possesses vector control abilities, meaning he can freely manipulate the direction of any known energy, making him a formidable opponent. Crucially, she's currently under surveillance in an indoor experiment, with countless cameras focused on her and Accelerator, and researchers at the Research Institute constantly analyzing their battle. Prematurely revealing his strength would be unwise. It's better to leave. find a place to hide, and slowly consider his next move. Although he has a basic understanding of this world thanks to the knowledge implanted in Misaka 9981's mind, many aspects remain unknown, making it unsuitable to be too conspicuous. He ran away, seeing George flee without continuing the fight. Accelerator was immediately stunned. Normally, these clones act like robots, following orders without running away or begging for mercy, so he has no qualms about killing them. But now one has run away. Why? Is it out of fear? Do these puppets also have emotions like humans? Accelerator's pupils contracted, and he used his ability to create force-whirling tornadoes behind him, quickly flying towards the stairs George had escaped down. Impossible, you must be devising a new battle strategy. Fine, then I'll play along. Chapter 192 The Mutant Misaka Sisters. What's going on? Why did number 9981's abilities suddenly increase so much? Inside the experimental base, the researchers monitoring the battle were equally dumbfounded. Today's experiment was similar to the previous 9980 experiment. Number 9981 was killed by Accelerator shortly after the battle began. But just as they were about to send other Misaka clones to retrieve the body and clean up the battlefield, number 9981 suddenly came back to life, and her abilities increased dramatically. According to the instruments, the burst of electricity in that instant had reached the level of a level 4 Esper. Could it be a mutation? Quick, stop today's experiment immediately. Don't let Accelerator kill her. Bring her back for research and see what happened, the laboratory director ordered excitedly. A clone had actually gone from level 2 to level 4 in the battle. If they could figure out how this happened, could they mass-produce level 4 Espers? Level 2 Espers were indeed useless. After all, a level 2 Esper wasn't much stronger than an ordinary person wielding a gun. However, level 4 ability users are different. Level 4 users are already very strong, and ordinary people can't pose a threat to them. If they could be mass-produced, they could truly overturn the entire world. Number 9981 hasn't responded and has destroyed the monitoring devices on her body. We can't locate her now, a researcher in charge of monitoring hurriedly reported. The person in charge's expression changed immediately upon hearing this. Impossible. How could this be? Get all the nearby surveillance footage, and find her at all costs. Meanwhile, George, with his superhuman physical abilities, quickly descended from the 5th floor of the abandoned building to the 1st floor, then used magnetism to destroy the monitoring devices on his body. He then used the illusion charm to become invisible and escape the building, leaving Accelerator, who was chasing him from the 5th floor, empty-handed. Spreading his wings, George flew above a building, looking at the bustling academy city around him, and began to ponder. He was certain that he had seen the railgun and the method of launching attacks with coins somewhere in his previous life, perhaps in a protagonist from an anime. But he didn't remember the specifics, and he didn't know what it was about, since he rarely watched anime. However, since his previous clones all had magic in their worlds, this world most likely also has magic. It's just that the memories implanted in the Misaka clones seem to lack relevant information. Then I'll find the protagonist first, and then observe and see what I discover. After thinking for a while, he gradually formed a plan. Since Misaka Mikado is the protagonist of this world, the story will definitely revolve around her, and her clones are also clones of Misaka Mikado. Perhaps it's better to find Misaka Mikado first. George sometimes wondered what the point was of creating clones in various worlds. He personally felt that the first benefit was having an extra life. Even if his main body in the Marvel Universe died, his consciousness could transfer to any of his clones and continue to live. As long as not every clone in every world died, he wouldn't completely die. But if possible, it's best not to die, especially his main body in the Marvel Universe. Because each time he splits his soul to obtain a new clone, it's the main body that splits. If the main body dies, and only a few clones survive, it's probably impossible to continue creating new clones. Secondly, because the talents and abilities of each clone can be continuously stacked, each additional clone represents a comprehensive, collective enhancement. The more clones, the greater the strengthening. The Harry Potter boy gained wizarding blood, the fairy tale cat gained magic power and reaction speed, the panda in the wizarding apprentice gained strength and physique, and the Misaka clone in this world enhanced its superpowers. Thirdly, each clone can acquire different magic and abilities from various worlds, allowing the original body and other clones to thrive in each world and possess more trump cards. In the Harry Potter world, he had superpowers to cheat with compared to other wizards. In the fairy tale world, he gained the magic and superpowers of the Harry Potter world to arm himself, while the fairy tale magic could also be used in the previous two worlds. Now, in this new world, he has the magic and abilities of all other worlds as a foundation. With such stacking, he will become increasingly powerful. Fourthly, each additional body means one more brain to learn. If focusing on one magic at a time, the learning efficiency is several times that of others. So, what will he do each time a clone awakens? The most important thing is naturally to ensure the survival of his clones. If the clones die, then everything will be for nothing. After ensuring their survival, he can then search for all methods in this world that can improve his strength, so that both his main body and all his clones can benefit simultaneously. Currently, there are no clues regarding magic, but there is a considerable amount of information regarding superpowers. According to the superpower levels of this world, he should have reached level 4, but that doesn't mean his limit is level 4. The superpowers of the Misaka clones have merged with his own, and their potential hasn't been fully developed yet. If he can further develop them, he might be able to break through level 4 and reach level 5. Misaka Mikado's main body had the potential of level 5, and then she gradually reached level 5 from level 1 in Academy City. Normally, everyone's superpower level is fixed, but some people don't immediately reach their limit when they first awaken their superpowers. They need to develop them slowly at school. Once they reach their limit, it becomes fixed. The limit for level 3 is level 3, and the limit for level 4 is level 4. The next step is to learn how to better use and train one's superpowers. George felt he hadn't reached his limit yet. Perhaps by interacting with Misaka Mikado's true form and learning about Academy City, he could break through to level 5. Direction Manifestation. Misaka Mikado, casting a tracking spell with hand gestures, he spread his wings and followed a golden arrow towards Misaka Mikado's location. This world didn't have ones yet, so he still had to use hand gestures to cast magic like in the Harry Potter world. I need to find Professor Snape to learn wandless, silent spellcasting when school starts, George thought to himself as he flew. Hand gestures were still relatively slow, although his hand speed was amazing now, it still took 2 seconds. And generally, in the early days of a new world, it would be difficult for him to find suitable materials for making wands so quickly. However, wandless spellcasting was generally only mastered by top-tier wizards, and with his current learning efficiency of 5 heads, it would probably take some time. Chapter 193 Temporary Stronghold. Misaka 9981. According to experimental requirements, you need to return to the experimental research base. Please respond. He hadn't flown far when the voices of several Misaka clones echoed in his mind. It's the Misaka network? George didn't respond, but instead used his mental abilities in occlumency to temporarily isolate himself from the Misaka network. Misaka Mikado's abilities are related to magnetic fields, so the Misaka clones can link their brains together using the same brainwaves, constructing a special Misaka network. Within this network, all the Misaka clones can share information, enhancing their overall computing power. However, George suspected this was one of the methods the laboratory used to control the Misaka clones, so he directly isolated his brainwaves to avoid being affected by the Misaka network. According to the Misaka clone data, the superpowers in this world are different from those in the Marvel Universe. The superpowers in this world are artificially developed, achieved through drugs, hypnosis, and mechanical modifications. They influence the microscopic world through personal reality within the brain, and this influence is amplified by chaos theory, thus forming superpowers. Therefore, the strength of superpowers is also linked to the brain's computational ability. The stronger the computational ability, the stronger the superpower. However, superpowers in the Marvel Universe don't require any mental computation, they are used instinctively. This is because mutant superpowers originate from the X gene, which is the result of experiments conducted by the Celestials on humans. The Inhumans, whom he hasn't encountered yet, are also a result of experiments conducted by the Kree on humans. This is somewhat similar to the Infinity Stones in this world. Infinity Stones are a special case among superpowered individuals. They don't need mental computation or artificial development, they are born with superpowers. It is said that current methods of artificially developing superpowers are actually based on imitating Infinity Stones. Before the establishment of Academy City, ordinary people in this world were unaware of the existence of superpowers because the number of Infinity Stones was extremely small, possibly less than 100 worldwide. Scattered throughout the world, they were even rarer, and ordinary people, having never seen them, believed that superpowers were merely fictional. The reason George was able to directly leap to level 4 after combining the level 2 superpowers of the Misaka clone is, it's because his original magnetic control was entirely instinctive, but now he has an additional brain calculation mode, significantly developing his superpowers through scientific methods. He believes he can continue developing it to level 5, or even better, through further learning. This is because he doesn't only have one brain, he also has his main body and other clones, theoretically allowing his brain calculation ability to increase several times over. Found her, outside the girls' dormitory building at Changchangpan Middle School. George, in his invisible state, saw Misaka Mikado, dressed in children's cartoon pajamas, through the window. However, the situation inside the dormitory was quite eye-opening for him. Oni-sama, I won't do it again, I won't do it again. Inside the dormitory, a girl with twin tails wearing a lace bra waved her pink frog-patterned underwear, begging for mercy while using her special abilities to teleport around the room, dodging Misaka Mikado's electric shocks. Misaka Mikado roared angrily, "Kurako, I'm going to teach you a lesson today for your perverted personality." A moment later, the twin-tailed girl, Kurako, trembled and collapsed to the ground, electrocuted. At this moment, Misaka Mikado, having calmed down, suddenly turned her head to look out the window in George's direction. "What is this feeling? It's somewhat similar to my brainwaves." Sensing it, George, seeing Misaka Mikado looking in his direction, immediately used his mental abilities to further conceal the spread of his brainwaves. His current clone was a clone of Misaka Mikado, naturally possessing the same brainwaves as her. Others wouldn't be able to sense anything through brainwaves, but Misaka Mikado was a level 5 Electromaster, extremely sensitive to brainwaves. "Maybe it's just my imagination," Misaka Mikado murmured, looking at the empty sky, then skillfully found a rope under her bed, tied up her roommate Kurako, threw her onto the next bed, and fell into good sleep. Recently, she had been on edge because of her cloning project, but fortunately, after her investigation, she discovered that the cloning project had long been terminated. "Perhaps, it wouldn't be bad for me to integrate into this world as a mutated Misaka clone," George thought to himself as he flew to the roof of the girls' dormitory. He always felt that Academy City was no ordinary place. To create such a large superpowered area and maintain its autonomy, keeping so many superpowered individuals following order in their studies and lives, the creators and higher-ups of Academy City must be extraordinary. Therefore, it was best not to be too arrogant. Dig 3 feet deep, using a digging spell, he dug a fist-sized hole in the rooftop wall. Then, he used a seamless expansion spell to enlarge the space inside the hole to the size of a house. Muggle Shield. After casting the shield spell, he flew into the hole. This would serve as his temporary base. In the world of magic apprentices, magicians can achieve immortality after reaching level 500. George hadn't reached level 500 yet, but through the continuous efforts of his panda clone, he had reached level 400. Although he couldn't achieve immortality yet, he could already survive without food or water. Therefore, George's current Misaka clone wouldn't have to worry about food or drink. After entering the space he had prepared, he didn't immediately rest but began to familiarize himself with his superpowers, especially in controlling electricity. Meanwhile, at the research headquarters of the Absolute Ability Evolution Project, Misaka 9981 has disconnected from the Misaka network, and she hasn't been detected in the school's surveillance footage. It's as if she vanished into thin air. The subordinate asked the person in charge, "Should we temporarily halt the plan and continue only after finding 9981? 9981 might just be an accident. We can't abandon the Absolute Ability Evolution plan because of one accident. Tomorrow, 9982 will continue with the first outdoor combat simulation, and at the same time, don't give up the search for 9981. After thinking for a moment, the person in charge gave the final order. The Absolute Ability Evolution plan came from higher-ups, and even he, as the person in charge, didn't have the authority to suspend it. As for the mutant 9981, he would report the relevant information to the school's higher-ups later, and they would make the decision. She was clearly dead, so why did she revive and even evolve her abilities? This isn't scientific, it doesn't make sense. Could it be the magicians on the magic side playing tricks? Chapter 194 The Plan to Save the Misaka Sisters. The next day, After waking up, George continued to follow Misaka Mikado invisibly. Since it was summer vacation and there were no classes, Misaka Mikado had nothing to do and spent the day wandering around Academy City. During this time, she encountered a group of elementary school students who were just beginning to develop their superpowers, played soccer with them for a while, and then was attracted by a little girl's Dakota badge, spending the whole day struggling in front of the gacha machine to get the badge. As expected, kids are still kids. After following Misaka Mikado for a day without finding any useful information, George was already considering whether to give up on her and explore on his own. However, things changed in the evening. Misaka Mikado encountered clone number 9982, the clone immediately after him. Misaka Mikado seemed very concerned about being cloned, wanting to find the laboratory that cloned her through the clone, and seemed to treat the clone as a younger sister. This gave George some new ideas. Originally, he hadn't paid much attention to the more than 10,000 surviving clones, nor had he considered rescuing them. But now, since the original Misaka Mikado seems quite concerned, he wondered if he could use her to allow the clones to live openly and legitimately in Academy City. If so, he could also use his clone identity to live openly and legitimately here, better developing his superpowers and searching for traces of magic. On the surface, his identity would be Misaka Mikado's clone number 9981, only with a slight mutation that greatly enhanced his abilities. Misaka is going to an experiment and won't be returning to the lab. It's your freedom to follow Misaka, but you won't see the person who created her, Misaka 9982 said to Misaka Mikado on the overpass. Misaka Mikado's plan failed, and after some childish play, she reluctantly bid farewell to Misaka 9982. These clones don't seem to be devoid of emotions after all. That's good, it keeps me from looking too different, George thought to himself, observing from the air. He had originally thought that clones, because they hadn't been programmed with emotions, were no different from robots. However, through today's observation, he discovered that this wasn't the case. The clones were like blank slates, forcibly filled with various kinds of knowledge, without undergoing normal growth, which is why they felt like robots. If they had grown normally, they might not be much different from normal people. In the few hours he spent with Misaka Mikado, clone number 9982 clearly treated her as his older sister, showing some dependence, and even took the Dakota that Misaka Mikado had spent a whole day drawing as a gift. Do you want to know the truth? Landing below the overpass, as Misaka Mikado's original body stepped off the overpass, George deactivated his invisibility. Misaka Mikado saw yet another clone that looked exactly like her and her eyes widened immediately. Who are you? I am Misaka 9981, and the one just now was Misaka 9982. The laboratory has cloned a total of 20,000 Misaka clones, George said calmly. Hearing George's words, Misaka Mikado grabbed his arm. What exactly happened? Do you know about the Absolute Level Evolution Project? George didn't care about Misaka Mikado's grip on his arm, as it was too weak for him. He simply slowly told Misaka Mikado the details of the Absolute Level Evolution Project. 9,980 Misaka clones have died before me. Last night, I was supposed to be killed by Accelerator, but in my dying moments, I somehow awakened my survival instincts and self-awareness. So I escaped. And Misaka 9982 just now said she was going to do the experiment, which is basically sending her to her death. There's a limit to nonsense. They want to kill me 128 times and then replace me with a clone? This is just too absurd. After listening to George's explanation, Misaka Mikado trembled, her face filled with anger and disbelief. She understood that the seemingly beautiful Academy City hid some darkness, but she couldn't believe that it could be so dark and inhumane. If you don't believe me, we can follow Misaka 9982 and verify what I'm saying right away. George didn't explain further, but turned and walked towards the overpass. The experiments start at 9 o'clock every night, and there are still 10 minutes until 9. Misaka Mikado saw George heading towards the overpass and remembered the information she had seen in the lab about the mass production of Ability Users project. She was already mostly convinced. So she turned and caught up with George. She couldn't let clones like 9982 be killed. Because of the same brainwave connection, George and Misaka Mikado quickly caught up with Misaka 9982, but George didn't let Misaka Mikado go forward. There might be a monitoring device on her body. We'll follow her slowly. What's your plan? Misaka Mikado looked at Misaka 9982, who walked into an empty alley, took out a pre-prepared submachine gun, and waited quietly there. She asked George, who looked calm beside her. She always felt that this clone called Misaka 9981 seemed to have a very mature mind. Perhaps she already had a plan before coming to her. George nodded. There are two ways to stop the Absolute Ability User project. The first is to get Accelerator to give up the experiment. Without a test subject, we won't have to sacrifice our clones. But the difficulty is that if Accelerator doesn't give up, we might not be a match for him. The second is to find the research labs for this experiment and destroy all the labs and data, so the experiment can continue. However, there are more than 20 research labs for this experiment, scattered throughout Academy City. Unless we can destroy them all at once when they're not paying attention, they can still continue the experiment once they receive the news and move. Let's go with the first one. Accelerator will appear in a few minutes. I'll persuade him to withdraw from this experiment. Misaka Mikado felt a surge of electricity. Destroying more than 20 research labs at the same time is unlikely, so the only option is to get Accelerator to give up the plan. If he doesn't give up, then we'll fight him until he does. Although Accelerator is ranked ahead of her, she is very confident in her strength. In that case, I'll tell you about Accelerator first. George quickly recited the information about Accelerator that he had in his mind. The Misaka clones have fought Accelerator 9980 times, and all the experience from those battles will be transmitted to the minds of every subsequent clone through the Misaka network. George also has a copy. Chapter 195: The Invisible Surveillance. To be honest, Accelerator's superpowers are somewhat abnormal. However, through analyzing the 9980 battles between the clones and Accelerator from his memories, George has found some ways to counter him. Accelerator can control the direction of all energy through skin contact, even the kinetic energy of physical attacks and brainwaves for mind control. Even more terrifying is the defensive reflexes he creates using his abilities. Accelerator can use his brain's immense computational power to deploy reflexes on his skin. Anything harmful to him in his perception will be reflected, including attacks like gas and nuclear radiation. These reflexes will remain even after he loses consciousness unless he actively cancels them. Theoretically, while he maintains these reflexes, no one can harm his physical body. However, George also noticed that Accelerator's reflexes only work within his cognitive energy system. If the system is beyond his understanding, the reflexes are unlikely to be effective. Because he doesn't understand it, he can't calculate or control it. To control it, he needs to analyze the energy, which takes time. While reflection is indeed powerful, it has its limits. If the energy of the attack is too immense, he believes even Accelerator would struggle to reflect it. For example, if a planet were thrown at him, his reflection wouldn't be able to deflect the entire planet. Finally, there's the weakness shared by all espers. Despite their powerful abilities, they are still human. They will starve if they don't eat, die of thirst if they don't drink, and die without oxygen. In his current situation, the latter two are more difficult, but the first is quite simple. Because the magic he knows is from other worlds, it should theoretically be attacks beyond Accelerator's comprehension. Even if some straightforward magical attacks can be quickly analyzed and intercepted on the spot, some undetectable magical attacks would be difficult to defend against. Any energy can be controlled. Is this vector control? Hearing George's explanation, Misaka Mikado frowned. She had never met Accelerator, but she had heard of this famous strongest esper in Academy City and knew that his ability was vector control, but she didn't know its specific uses. If that's the case, then my attacks will be less effective against him. I wonder if maximizing the power would work. It's alright, I have a plan, George whispered to Misaka Mikado, beginning to explain his plan. Meanwhile, in a windowless building in the 7th district of Academy City, a white-haired man slumped inside a red liquid support device muttered, "What's wrong with this guy?" This man was none other than Edward Alexander, the creator of Academy City and the greatest magician of the 20th century, now known as Aleister Crowley. He had learned of the anomaly of Clo 9981 through his own nanobits monitoring the entire Academy's airborne loops, when the head of the Absolute Ability Evolution Project reported the information to him. However, he hadn't paid much attention to it at the time. Upgrading from level 2 to level 4, while somewhat unbelievable, wasn't anything too surprising to him. Although the aptitude assessment clearly stated that the level of a superpower was fixed, Sometimes this rule could be broken due to certain circumstances. It wasn't until the nanobots he was monitoring suddenly lost track of Clo 9981 that he began to take the matter seriously. While an Esper's abilities could potentially surpass their original level under special circumstances, it was absolutely impossible for two Espers to be born simultaneously. Clone 9981 inherited the electromagnetic force from the original Misaka Mikado, not the superpower of invisibility. Due to her invisibility, the nanobots using the teleportation technique couldn't find Clone 9981 until she reappeared on the overpass and made contact with the original Misaka Mikado. I'll observe her for a while, then send in the Anbu to capture her. The Absolute Ability Evolution project wasn't his ultimate goal. The previous mass production of Espers was merely a cover for his true purpose. He wanted to use these two fake projects to mislead the magical world, allowing him to legitimately send the artificially created Misaka clones around the world, thus expanding the imaginary number district, originally confined to Academy City, to the entire globe. If he could fully master the unfinished imaginary number zone, 5 elements mechanism in the future and activate the artificial celestial realm, all magicians' power would lose control due to the emergence of the new realm, ultimately leading to their self-destruction. The unexpected incident involving Clo 9981 might cause his plans to deviate, so if he was lucky enough to escape being killed by Accelerator this time, he decided to observe for a while before sending his Anbu to capture and study it to see what was going on. In his view, even if the level 4 Clo 9981 and the level 5 Misaka Mikado herself joined forces, they wouldn't be a match for Accelerator. Is that enough? Misaka Mikado looked at George with some surprise. George's plan was simple. Once Accelerator appeared, he would fight with all his might to attract Accelerator's attention. Trust me, I'll handle the rest. As long as Misaka Mikado attracted Accelerator's attention, he could become invisible, approach Accelerator at the opportune moment, and use the Soul Reaper's curse to temporarily control Accelerator and remove his defensive reflexes. Without his defensive reflexes, Accelerator would be an ordinary person, and then he could manipulate him however he wanted. Alternatively, using the Killing Curse, which ignores all defenses, might also be effective. If Accelerator's analytical abilities are truly that strong, capable of instantly analyzing his magic from another world and reflecting it defensively, then even if they can't win, they can simply escape with Misaka Mikado's main body and clone. They can just drag them to the mirror world, and Accelerator, who doesn't understand magic, won't be able to find him even if he destroys the entire Academy City. Okay, if I can defeat him head-on, then the later plans are unnecessary. Despite knowing that Accelerator's abilities counter her, she still wanted to try. George nodded. If Misaka Mikado could defeat Accelerator, that would be even better. He also wanted to see the true strength of the level 5 Misaka Mikado's main body. These things are hard to predict. Strange, it's that feeling of being monitored again. After communicating and discussing with Misaka Mikado's main body, George couldn't help but frown. Are the monitoring facilities in these laboratories this advanced? Chapter 196 I have a plan. When George first awoke from his clone yesterday, his mental abilities constantly sensed he was being monitored. This feeling only disappeared after he went invisible, so he didn't deactivate his invisibility until he established his base and entered it. Today, while tracking Misaka Mikado, he remained invisible without experiencing the same monitoring. However, the moment he deactivated his invisibility, the monitoring returned immediately. But he was certain that before appearing, he had destroyed all the nearby surveillance cameras that might have captured him. He closed his eyes, amplified his mental abilities to their maximum, and expanded them outwards. He quickly sensed something was wrong. The monitoring seemed to originate from countless tiny, constantly moving points nearby, almost imperceptible without close inspection. I'll let you monitor me. George activated his magnetic power, forcefully crushing all the small monitoring points within his magnetic field, instantly eliminating the feeling of being monitored. No matter how high-tech the monitoring equipment in those laboratories was, even if he couldn't see it with the naked eye, it would still be made of metal. Anything made of metal is within his range. As mentioned before, his superpower is essentially the same as Misaka Mikado's, but their applications differ. Misaka Mikado specializes in generating electricity from magnetism. Even when controlling metal, she uses her own electrical current to manipulate it. Her 3x sonic railgun doesn't directly control game coins, but rather electromagnetically induces them. George, on the other hand, Uses magnetism to directly and crudely control a metal, like Magneto. Any technological object containing metal poses no threat to him. Previously, his superpower level was too low to be apparent, but now, after being enhanced by the Misaka clone, both the weight and range of his control have significantly increased. While he can't lift a 4 or 5,000 ton submarine from the ground like Magneto, lifting objects weighing 10 or 20 tons is effortless for him. Furthermore, if his superpower continues to develop and reaches level 5 in this world, it will be further enhanced. Those invisible metal surveillance devices, now that he has discovered them, can no longer monitor him. We've been discovered. Aleister snapped his eyes open, his brow furrowing slightly. He had been using his teleportation ability to monitor every corner of Academy City, and this was the first time he'd been discovered. Crucially, it wasn't the level 5 Misaka Mikado herself he'd discovered, but rather a level 4 clone. This made him increasingly suspicious of Clone 9981. Looks like I need to capture Misaka 9981 as soon as possible. Aleister used his communicator to order the head of the Mizuho organization's Pathology Analysis Research Institute to commission the tools team, comprised of level 5 espers in the dark side, to immediately capture the level 4 Clone 9981. Since Clone 9981 could thwart his surveillance, he couldn't maintain overall control, so he had to resolve this issue quickly to prevent his plans from going awry. He's here. At that moment, George and Misaka Mikado both saw a white-haired boy enter the alley. It was Accelerator, a level 5 esper. It's 8:58 now. Experiment 9982 will begin in 2 minutes. In the alley, Clone 9982 spoke in a completely flat voice. Accelerator, hands in his pockets, looked at Clone 9982. Instead of his usual sarcasm, he asked somewhat frantically, "What happened to that clone yesterday? Why did it run away? Aren't you clones supposed to be completely devoid of human emotions? You won't feel fear or apprehension." Previously, he had always viewed those clones as emotionless machines, without fear or pleading, like NPCs in a game, whose deaths helped him level up. That's why he had never paid them any attention. But yesterday, one clone had actually shown fear and run away. Did that mean these clones were more than just clones? This made him waver, panic, and feel lost. Because deep down, what he hated most was harming innocent people. From birth until the age of 9, he had always been researched in research institutes. After awakening his abilities at 10, he was placed in a special class with only him, and then moved between various research institutes. Until he became the number 1 ranked level 5 esper in Academy City. But because of his immense power, he was coveted by many organizations, who sent various people to contact and try to control him, causing him endless annoyance. Even after he broke the arms and legs of those people, they still didn't stop. So the reason he was persuaded to join the Absolute Level 5 Esper project was actually to become the absolute strongest, so that he would no longer be harassed or harm others. Misaka 9981 is an accident, don't worry about it. As long as you continue to complete the next experiment, you can evolve into level 6 Absolute Level 5 Esper after killing 10,020 Misakas. Misaka 9982, wearing the Jakota badge, put down the military night vision goggles on her head, raised her submachine gun, and attacked Accelerator. Time: 9 o'clock. Experiment 9982 begins. So annoying. If you want to die, then die. Accelerator frowned, and before the bullets even reached him, he used vector control to reflect them all back. Having fought Accelerator 9981 times, Misaka 9982 skillfully dodged the attacks, activated her electric shock ability to extinguish the lights in the alley, and began a sneak attack from the shadows. However, the difference in strength was too great, and she was quickly disarmed of her night vision goggles and submachine gun, and began to move the battlefield according to the battle script. Accelerator also calmly followed, planning to defeat the clone according to the experimental requirements and see if she would beg for mercy before dying. If she would, he would end the experiment; if not, then he was just overthinking it. George and Misaka Mikado saw Misaka 9982 and Accelerator move the battlefield and followed closely behind. The final battlefield was an abandoned dock by the river. According to the experimental script, Misaka 9982 would be killed by Accelerator here, thus ending today's experiment. "We can make our move," Seeing that Misaka 9982 was about to be caught, George disappeared, and Misaka Mikado rushed out to block Accelerator's path. Stop, another one. They didn't say they were going to do 2 experiments today, but it doesn't matter. Accelerator waved his hand, using energy to control a whirlwind that lifted the container and hurled it at the 2 Misakas. Iron Sand Sword. Misaka Mikado used electromagnetic force to gather iron sands from the ground within a 200-meter radius, forming an electric chainsaw several tens of meters long. With a gentle swing, she cleaved the container in 2. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 197 Accelerator being controlled. Manipulating iron sand attacks, such power. Is this the clone that escaped yesterday, or the original? Accelerator's expression changed drastically when he saw Misaka Mikado easily split the container in 2. Misaka Mikado dispersed her electromagnetic chainsaw, transforming it into a high-speed vibrating storm of iron sand that enveloped Accelerator from all sides. At the same time, she took out a coin and fired it at 3 times the speed of sound, forming her most powerful railgun. Does it matter whether I'm a clone or the original? Why did you participate in this experiment? You killed so many people, don't you think you're too cruel? You're not a clone. Even the clone that escaped yesterday didn't have your strength. You're the original. Accelerator waved his hand, forcibly dispersing the energy on the iron sand. At the same time, he activated his surface reflection ability, forcefully blocking Misaka Mikado's full-force railgun attack. After confirming that the opponent wasn't a clone, he actually breathed a sigh of relief. Don't make me sound so cruel. I was just dealing with some replicas that appear with a push of a button. Even replicas are living beings with flesh and blood. Knowing Accelerator's abilities beforehand, Misaka Mikado, though shocked that her special move hadn't worked, didn't give up and unleashed her next attack. Come forth, Thunder Giant. A violent electromagnetic force erupted from her body, forcibly drawing out iron sands mixed with dust from the ground, gradually forming a terrifying, 100-meter-tall Thunder Giant. Iron sand and dust rubbed against each other inside the Thunder Giant's body, and terrifying lightning surged wildly within it. With this move, even mountains will be destroyed. Prepare for judgment. Misaka Mikado stood atop the Thunder Giant's head, embracing Misaka 9982, and pointed down at Accelerator. Seeing this, Accelerator covered his face and laughed maniacally. Judging me? Fine, this boring experiment is progressing too slowly. I'm getting impatient. Defeating you, the original, should greatly shorten the time. He slowly rose into the air, spreading his arms. Let me see the power of your attack. Go. Misaka Mikado unleashed all her electromagnetic power, and terrifying electricity erupted from the Thunder Giant's hands, drawing countless iron pellets that shot towards Accelerator. This was essentially an enlarged version of the Super Railgun. Not bad. George, who was now invisible and almost upon Accelerator, watched Misaka Mikado's Thunder Giant attack and secretly marveled. In Misaka 9981's records, Misaka Mikado had never used this move. It must be a new technique she developed based on her own abilities. In terms of power, George thought it was quite impressive. After this was over, she decided to learn this move from Misaka Mikado. The super powerful railgun, several meters in diameter, struck Accelerator perfectly, but unfortunately, it couldn't penetrate his defenses and remained locked in a stalemate. Clearly, Accelerator's defenses were far stronger than Misaka Mikado had imagined. Meanwhile, on the bridge beside the dock, a minivan screeched to a halt in the middle, and 4 girls stepped out. This is the railgun? It doesn't seem that impressive. The tallest girl with long brown hair looked at Misaka Mikado standing atop the giant's head with a disdainful smile. Just a showpiece. Mujino Shizuri, a fellow level 5 Esper known as Atomic Destruction, possessed the ability to prevent electrons from being converted into particles or waveforms, maintaining them in a pure electronic form. Because she and Misaka Mikado both belonged to the electronic control category, she was often compared, and her ranking was lower, which made her very unhappy with Misaka Mikado, whom she hadn't even met yet. How could she possibly compare to the queen, the strongest gadget? At this moment, the blonde lolly beside her chuckled. On the other side, the hooded girl shook her head. She's facing the number 1 ranked Accelerator, So it's best not to underestimate her. Alright, our mission target this time is clone number 9981, Takatsubo. Is that the injured guy she's holding? Mujino, the leader, looked at the black-haired girl who hadn't spoken. The black-haired girl shook her head weakly. According to the intelligence, that should be clone number 9982. Number 9981 seems to have the ability to become invisible. I'm searching for other force fields nearby. Found it, there's an additional force field reaction there. She pointed to the empty space behind Accelerator. Just then, Misaka Mikado's power was running low, the continuous super railgun attack ended, and just as Accelerator relaxed and was about to taunt her, George appeared and activated magic. Solastral projection, the magic wave of the Soul Reaper spell penetrated a defense and hit Accelerator, whose face immediately showed a happy smile. Disarm, George pressed Accelerator down to the ground. Due to the effects of the Imperious Curse, Accelerator readily disengaged his defensive reflexes. Condense, George activated his ability, condensing nearby iron sands into thin wires, which he manipulated to pierce through Accelerator's body, binding him tightly. At this moment, Accelerator's eyes regained their clarity. The Imperious Curse was already less effective against those with strong wills, and even less effective against a level 5 Esper like Accelerator with exceptional mental processing abilities. However, George didn't intend to control Accelerator indefinitely with the Imperious Curse. You'd better not activate your ability. The wires are already piercing several vital organs. If you use your ability to pull them out, you might die on the spot. You're not the original, you're also a clone. Accelerator coughed up blood, staring at George, his pupils shrinking instantly. The original had just dispelled the Thunder Giant and was being supported by the clone he had just fought, so this new one who had broken his defensive reflexes was naturally a clone as well. That's right, I'm Misaka 9981, the one who almost died at your hands last night. George shrugged and asked the original Misaka Mikado, how are you? Are you alright? Power is critically low. I'll be back to normal after a night's rest. Misaka Mikado nodded weakly. She hadn't expected Misaka 9981 to be so powerful, actually managing to subdue Accelerator using an unknown method. How could this be? You're just a clone, why are you like a normal human? Accelerator looked at the expressive George, his body beginning to tremble. He wasn't trembling because George had breached his defensive reflexes, but because this clone of George was just like a normal human. Did that mean that the clones he had killed before were also like that? Chapter 198 Why are clones so powerful? Because you killed living, breathing people. We clones just grew too fast during creation and didn't have time to evolve normal emotions. We're not robots. George sensed Accelerator's unstable mental state and directly attacked his conscience. You're a cruel and vicious murderer. If you hadn't killed them, they would have gradually adapted to having emotions in their own lives, just like me. Killing Accelerator, the number 1 ranked clone in Academy City, now was clearly inappropriate, since Lee still planned to live openly in Academy City with the other surviving clones. So, when he sensed Accelerator's psychological weakness with his psychic abilities, he immediately used words to provoke him. If Accelerator voluntarily gave up the subsequent experimental plan, then everyone would be happy. If not, it wouldn't be too late to kill him then. He couldn't leave a future threat who might retaliate at any time. So, they weren't just puppets. Accelerator lowered his head, his expression gradually collapsing. The intense guilt made him wish he were dead right now. Leech of Mind, taking advantage of Accelerator's inability to activate his defensive reflexes and his mental breakdown, George used the Leech of Mind spell to probe his memories. After understanding his memories, he felt he had the upper hand. However, just as he was about to discuss the next plan with Misaka Mikado, a green bolt of lightning suddenly shot towards George from a distance. Sensing the threat, George dodged the green lightning's sneak attack. The green lightning, after passing George, struck the containers behind him, piercing through 4 containers before disappearing, its power not to be underestimated. I really didn't expect a clone to defeat the number 1 ranked Accelerator. It seems that rankings can't be taken seriously. Mujino Shizuri, surrounded by a green ball of electricity, arrogantly walked over from a distance. You're clone number 9981, right? Behave yourself and don't resist, or your body will get damaged. Who are you people? Misaka Mikado, supported by clone number 9982, came to George's side and asked Mujino Shizuri with a frown. Mujino Shizuri's face showed a hint of disdain. The Dark Item Squad, entrusted by the head of the Mizuho Organization's Pathology Analysis Research Institute, is here to capture clone number 9981. By the way, I am the 4th-ranked level 5 Esper, Atomic Collapse, Mujino Shizuri. Is it because of my abnormal behavior that I've attracted attention? George frowned slightly. It seems that just getting Accelerator to give up the experiment isn't enough. These guys need to be wary of me too. Accelerator has already been defeated, and the Absolute Esper Evolution experiment can no longer proceed. Why do we still need to capture her? Misaka Mikado wanted to use her ability, but because she had just expended too much energy fighting Accelerator, only a few small sparks appeared on her body. Mujino Shigetoshi chuckled, "This is none of my business. I don't know what plan you're talking about. Our mission is simply to capture her. You'd better get out of the way. Although I'd love to fight you, the way you are now doesn't interest me at all. It's alright, you rest first, I'll handle it." George reached out and stopped Misaka Mikado, who was trying to drag herself forward, and walked to the opposite side of Mujino Shigetoshi. "Want to capture me? Then let's see if your level 5 has any ability. HMPH. A mere level 4 clone thinks he can talk like that just because he ambushed and defeated Accelerator. Too arrogant." Mujino Shigetoshi lifted her purple dress and elegantly sat down on the rock next to her, saying to 2 of the 3 people behind her, Kanuhada and Frenda, "You 2 go and deal with her. Don't kill her, or it'll be hard to explain later." Kanuhada is a level 4 Esper who can manipulate nitrogen in the air. Offensively, she can lift a small car and deflect bullets. Defensively, she can create nitrogen armor to block attacks from all directions. Frenda was a level 0 ability user, but she was agile and extremely skilled at using various homemade bombs for demolition, making her a headache even for most level 4 ability users. With the 2 of them working together, taking down a level 4 clone was a piece of cake. Not every enemy was worth her time, given her level 5 superpower. "Leave it to us." Frenda pulled out a specially made pistol and fired at George, while Joanki donned sunglasses and used nitrogen to propel himself at high speed towards George. The bullet flew towards George, but stopped less than a meter away. With his current control over magnetism, not even a missile could get close, let alone a bullet. Bang! The bullet exploded in a blinding flash the moment it stopped. "That wasn't an ordinary bullet, it was my specially made flashbang." Frenda smiled smugly, taking the opportunity to pull out a doll bomb from her bag and throw it around George. At that moment, Joanki, wearing sunglasses, rushed to George's side. Taking advantage of his momentary blindness from the flashbang, she punched him in the chin. Fueled by nitrogen, this punch could flip a car over. However, to her surprise, George, who had his eyes closed, swiftly raised his hand and precisely caught her fist. Not bad, George's face showed surprise. Even with the physical enhancements from so many worlds, catching this little girl's punch with his bare hands was still somewhat strenuous. Blinding was useless against him, as his mental abilities could perceive his surroundings in place of his eyes. "My turn." A violent current erupted from George's body, spreading along his fist towards Joanki. Currently, he didn't want to reveal too much about his magical abilities unless absolutely necessary. Everyone currently believed he was a mutated Misaka clone, and his multiple invisibility abilities could be explained, but revealing too much magical power would be difficult to explain. Especially since fairy tale magic always displayed magic circles, making it very conspicuous. No one would believe it was a superpower. The key issue is that he wasn't sure if magic even existed in this world. If it didn't, that would be fine, but if it did, what was the attitude of Academy City, a place where espers gathered, towards magic? What if it was a hostile force? Being hunted down by the entire Academy City would be disastrous. It wasn't that he couldn't escape, whether it was apparition or the mirror world, he could easily escape. But that would mean he'd be far from the protagonist, Misaka Mikado, and might miss some important events. Also, he wanted to continue developing his Esper abilities here, breaking through from level 4 to level 5. He actually blocked it, seeing the electric current erupting from George's body. Joanki knew it wasn't suitable for close combat anymore. She immediately coated her body with nitrogen to form a nitrogen armor, blocking the spreading high-voltage current, and quickly retreated. Chapter 199: The Electromagnetic Cannon That Can Turn Corners. Joanki was quite surprised that the clone could block her attack even with its eyes closed. According to the intelligence, Misaka Mikado, the Electromaster, didn't seem to have any particularly strong close combat abilities, So why did her clone have such strength to block her attack? Frenda, after exiting George's high-voltage electric attack range, Jawanki shouted, and Frenda immediately pressed the detonation button on the bomb. Boom, the bomb that had just been placed near George exploded. Unfortunately, after the smoke cleared, George was unharmed. Because when the bomb exploded, George had manipulated iron sand to form a shield, firmly protecting himself. Alright, I'm done playing with you, it's time to end this. George opened his eyes, waved his hands, and the iron sands turned into countless iron needles, flying towards Jawanki and Frenda in a barrage. Seeing this, Jawanki immediately rushed in front of Frenda, using nitrogen-formed armor to envelop the two of them. The iron needles hit the armor, but were deflected, unable to shatter it at all. It's time to end this. After all the iron needles landed, Jawanki converted the nitrogen back into her hand, grabbed the nearby container, and hurled it at George. At the same time, Frenda pulled out several homing bombs and threw them out. These high-tech homing bombs flew towards George from all directions in various arcs. However, George's lips curled into a slight smile. His abilities were not entirely the same as Misaka's. Using the same methods against Misaka would be a huge mistake. The iron needles that had initially landed at Jawanki and Frenda's feet were instantly propelled upwards under George's magnetic control, piercing through the undefended limbs of Jawanki and Frenda. The container and bombs, under his control, were first suspended in midair, then flew backwards towards Jawanki and Frenda. Misaka uses electricity to control a metal, and generally, once it's launched, it can no longer be controlled. But George is different. As long as it's within his magnetic control range, he can control it however he wants. Unless you have an automatically defending turtle shell-like accelerator, you'll have to face his 360-degree attacks at any time. Looks like you've got some skills. Let me play with you then. Seeing that the injured Jawanki couldn't immediately conjure nitrogen armor to defend, level 5 Mujino Shizuri couldn't sit still. He waved his hand and shot out several green bolts of lightning, instantly melting the concentration box, bomb, and iron needles into thin air. Let's play then. George conjured iron needles again, floating them in front of him. Then he concentrated electricity in his middle finger and flicked one of the needles. He was level 4 and couldn't make a railgun 3 times the speed of sound, but the power of 1 time the speed of sound was still considerable. With the support of 200 million volts of electricity, the iron needle shot towards Mujino Shizuri at supersonic speed. A railgun? Even the original version is useless against me, let alone this inferior version of yours. Mujino Shizuri stretched out his hand, and green electricity formed a circular shield in front of him. Any attack that met a green electronic shield would be instantly swallowed up and turned into air. Even a supersonic railgun traveling at 3 times the speed of sound, in theory, couldn't penetrate her defenses. That's not necessarily true. With a thought, George caused the railgun, which had been firing in a straight line, to arc through the air, bypassing the green shield and heading straight for Mujino Shizuri. He could make bullets curve before, and now that his superpowers had been upgraded, he could naturally make the railgun curve as well. Mujino Shizuri never expected George to have such a trick up his sleeve. Startled, she hurriedly conjured new green electricity in front of her, barely managing to block the railgun. However, before she could even catch her breath, George's second railgun arced towards her. And that wasn't all. Iron needles, formed from iron sand, also began to attack her from all directions. This is infuriating. Mujino Shizuri never imagined that she would be suppressed by a level 4 clone. This made her feel extremely humiliated. She roared, unleashing her full power. Green orbs of electricity formed, shooting out bolts of lightning that instantly and violently destroyed all attacks. She then turned her attacks on George. Where is he? She discovered that George, who had been standing there, was gone. After less than a second of stunned silence, she realized George had become invisible, a unique ability of the clone. Taketsubo, the level 4 tracker, Taketsubo Riko, activated her superpower, immediately pinpointing George's location. Mujino Shizuri immediately shot a beam of green light towards him. So it's a tracking ability. George dispelled his invisibility, dodging the attack, understanding the superpower of the last girl standing there. I wanted to keep it simple, but since that's the case, I'll have to be more brute force. After dodging the attack, George launched another curved railgun, simultaneously controlling iron sand to form needles to continue beating Mujino Shizuri. This kind of attack is useless against me. Mujino Shizuri also unleashed his power again, green electricity sweeping away all attacks. That's not necessarily true. Just then, taking advantage of the gap in Naratosi's power after his outburst, George's body was instantly enveloped in high-voltage electricity. His eyes flashed with white lightning, like Thor, and in the blink of an eye, he disappeared from his spot, appearing behind Naratoshi. With a heavy chop, Naratoshi was instantly knocked unconscious to the ground. As the electric light dissipated, George breathed a slight sigh of relief. Using electricity to enhance speed is indeed not so easy. I still need to practice more. Indeed, he had just tried using electricity to stimulate his body, greatly enhancing it to significantly increase his speed and strength. Using electricity to enhance the body is not uncommon. It is said that Laxus of Fairy Tale is so strong because he can use lightning to greatly enhance his body. Of course, not everyone can do this. At least Misaka Mikado, the original body, cannot do it, though not entirely impossible. It's just that Misaka Mikado's physical attributes are similar to those of an ordinary girl, and her body can only withstand a small amount of enhancement. She wouldn't use such a large current to enhance her body. Therefore, the effect is not particularly obvious. George's physical abilities, amplified by the combined effects of his multiple clones and especially his incredibly resilient wizard bloodline, allow him to withstand voltage amplification far exceeding the limits of normal humans. In fact, if he weren't currently trying to conceal his magic, the enhancement would be even more astonishing if he used electric stimulation after his giant magic had grown to gigantic size. At this rate, I'll soon become a melee mage like Fairy Tale. Giant magic combined with electric stimulation, just a barrage of punches, is hardly the epitome of a mage's elegance. Fortunately, he's not limited to melee combat. He's an all-around mage capable of both close-quarters melee attacks and ranged magical attacks. Chapter 200 George's Threat. Boss, she actually lost, seeing their 4th-ranked boss in Academy City defeated by the level 4 clone 9981. The group of friends, including Frenda, who were bandaging each other, were also incredulous. They simply couldn't understand how a mere level 4 clone could be so powerful. So strong. Not only Frenda and her friends, but even Misaka Mikado, who had recovered some strength, was equally shocked. She knew that even in her prime, she might not be able to defeat Atomic Destruction, ranked 4th, head-on. Lab leaders, I know you're watching. Accelerator has been defeated, and the level 5 Esper you sent has also lost to me. So I hope you can stop the experiments and let us clones live like normal people, George shouted, looking at the sky. I don't think you want to see 2 level 5 Espers wreaking havoc in Academy City. And I have a lot of data on your experiments in my head. If I release this data, letting the entire Academy City and the whole world see your experiments of killing clones, guess how many parents will still want their children to attend school in such a dark Academy City? How will the world view Academy City then? He had already discovered the advanced small surveillance cameras during Misaka Mikado's battle with Accelerator, but this time he didn't destroy them. He wanted the lab's higher-ups, or rather, the higher-ups of Academy City, to see Accelerator defeated, to see his strength, so they would be wary. The definition of a level 5 Esper is a terrifying existence capable of withstanding an entire army single-handedly. There are 7 level 5 Espers in Academy City, at least 7 on the surface. He doesn't know if there are others in secret. The number 1 ranked Esper is Accelerator, the number 2 is Kakin Titoku, the number 3 is Misaka Mikado, and the number 4 is Mujino Shizuri. He has now defeated Mujino Shizuri, who is ranked 4th, in a one-on-one fight, meaning he's at least in the top 3 in terms of combat strength. He also teamed up with Misaka Mikado to defeat Accelerator, so the higher-ups in Academy City should be well aware of the destructive power of their combined strength. The key is that most of the level 5 Espers in Academy City are students, like Misaka Mikado. They all have their own ideas and can't be controlled by the higher-ups. Therefore, if the higher-ups don't want the entire Academy City to be thrown into chaos, they should normally agree to his conditions. Of course, if they don't agree and believe they still have trump cards to continue capturing him, then he'll have no choice but to fight to the end and reveal his final trump card, magic. Then don't blame him for unleashing a berserk rage and destroying the entire Academy City. Interesting. Let's keep it. Maybe we can use it later, in the life support system of the 7th District building. Aleister pondered for a moment before relaying his order to his subordinates. The clone's strength exceeded his expectations. Forcibly capturing it would be too costly and completely disrupt his subsequent plans. Although there had been some unexpected events, it hadn't deviated too much from his plan. Therefore, he decided to temporarily abandon the capture of this special clone and continue with his next plan. Academy City had gained another Esper with level 5 combat power, which might not be a bad thing. If handled well, he could use this clone to facilitate the completion of other plans. It's just that I didn't get to train Imagine Breaker. Oh well, I'll arrange more training for him. In the original plan, he wanted the clone Misaka to introduce Kamar-Taj Tuma, who possessed Imagine Breaker, and then have Kamar-Taj Tuma fight Accelerator to get training. But now that Accelerator had been defeated by Misaka Mikado and the clone together, Kamar-Taj Tuma didn't need to participate. Ring ring ring. Shortly after George shouted his threat at the sky, the feeling of being monitored disappeared, and Taketsubo Riko's phone rang. A moment later, she said to George and Misaka Mikado, "The employer has transferred the mission payment to our account and asked me to tell you that the Absolute Ability Evolution project will be completely terminated from today. All clones will be freed and will have true human identities." "That's good." Misaka Mikado breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing this. George also smiled. At least it meant that the Academy City higher-ups had temporarily compromised, and he would soon have a legal and official identity in Academy City. Everything was over, and the Academy City ambulance arrived in time to carry the injured Accelerator and the others into the vehicle. At this moment, Misaka 9982 suddenly shuddered and turned to Misaka Mikado and George, saying, "Sister, the lab has transferred the remaining 10,018 of us to the hospital in the 7th district, and they've lifted the control over us, declaring that they will no longer restrict our freedom. It seems they've indeed abandoned the experiment." Upon hearing this, George reconnected to the Misaka network and saw the images uploaded by the Misaka sisters. At this point, he no longer needed to block the Misaka network. The Misaka network could share memories and assist in calculations, which was helpful to him. Of course, he wouldn't share his own memories, nor would he fully open the connection. He needed to maintain a state where he could disconnect and isolate himself at any time, in case the Misaka network malfunctioned and he could escape unaffected. "Let's go to the hospital." Misaka Mikado pulled George and Misaka 9982 into another ambulance, heading towards the hospital in the 7th district. The Misaka sisters had all been successfully rescued, but their subsequent resettlement was a major headache. In the ambulance, seeing Misaka Mikado's worried expression, George smiled and comforted her. "Don't worry about their future arrangements. The higher-ups in Academy City aren't that foolish. With over 10,000 level 2 Espers, they can form a network to communicate with each other. They won't just abandon them. While Academy City has 80% Espers, 60% of that are level 0 Espers, meaning they have negligible abilities and are practically useless. Of the remaining 20%, most are level 1, with levels 2, 3, and 4 becoming increasingly rare, reaching only 7 level 5. Therefore, the level 2 Misaka sisters, with their rich combat experience and ability to share memories online, would be an extremely powerful force even without being used for experiments, simply as a guard. The Academy City higher-ups spent so much money creating them, even if they abandoned the Absolute Esper evolution plan, they wouldn't simply discard them completely. So, Misaka Mikado, as a student, doesn't need to worry about these things. Their main goal is to prevent the Misaka sisters from being killed again. As long as they can live like normal people. Using their abilities to do some work and make a living is inevitable. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.